Okay. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV. It's a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Drew is on his way. He's yapping in the group chat, so hopefully he'll be here soon. But I want to start relatively on time and make sure that everyone... Look, I told you guys 8 o'clock... It's 8 o'clock. We got to get your money's worth, gang. We got to get your money's worth. I hope everyone's been having a great weekend. I hope you all have been excellent to each other, but we'll see. Erudite, how you been? How's life going? Oh, you're muted on your end, so give her a second, gang. She's still getting ready.
I'm fine. I'm doing fine. I'm just getting set up on my side. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Take your time.
As soon as I popped in.
Just know everyone can see us now. Everyone's watching. What is he doing? Give me a second.
Okay. Go.
Tried to call during the group chat. Speak of the devil. Okay, great. Wonderful.
Hey, man. Can you hear me and see me? 1 second.
Yeah, we can see you.
Excellent.
We can
Thank
hear
you,
guys.
guys.
Erudite's just getting her stream set up real quick, so give her a second, and once she's ready, we'll start. We're live, by the way, so no slurs or nothing. Okay, while we're
wasn't planning on it. That's good. Sounds good.
Yeah. How you been, man? It's been a while.
Good. How are you guys? Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I know this one's been a little bit of a bear to schedule, right? But we got it done.
That's okay.
And we're here, and I'm excited to get this show on the road.
Absolutely.
So just while Erudite's getting set up, just a little bit of a background information for my audience on why this conversation's happening. So we had Drew, Mr. Pavlou, on our show. Me and Tali had him on our show a week, maybe 2 ago. And during the show, Erudite was watching and wanted to jump in and say a few things. Unfortunately, Erudite was about to get on a plane and couldn't jump in then. So I decided we'd set it up, we'd have a conversation, and we'd talk, and I thought it'd be interesting to do. So here we are, gang. Here we are finally. It's great content so far. It's riveting stuff.
Sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm trying to find a faster way for Twitter streams to get going, because the only way I've figured out how to get live on Twitter is not quick, where I have to go live on my side with the RTMP code and then go into Twitter Media Studio to go live in there. Otherwise, it just won't show. I don't know. So if anyone knows how to go live on Twitter through OBS where it's automatic and I don't have to go into Twitter Studio afterwards and grab the live stream, if you're just going to show me how to use multi-stream, please don't. I know how to use multi-stream.
I use StreamYard. It's pretty easy.
I don't want to use StreamYard, so for anyone who will come to me and just tell me to use StreamYard, no. I'm intentionally not using the company that stole open source. I don't want to do that. But there's got to be a way to auto launch from OBS.
I don't even know how to use OBS.
Look, none of us know the tech stuff, right? I'm lucky I can get the stream to work at all. Okay, that's the extent of my expertise. So Luckily, though, I have a good community, so when I do run into technical issues, they're able to help me. But Twitter's a new one for me. I've never streamed to Twitter, so I unfortunately don't have any advice.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Hutch. There's got to be a way that it will just like always auto poll. Because right now it seems like I just have to go into Studio manually to grab the OBS stream.
Okay.
Which
Well, let me
seems
know. Let me know when you're set
stupid.
and ready, and we'll.
I'm almost set. I just spelled Drew's name wrong on my YouTube. It says draw. So I'm going to fix that.
Okay. No worries. Yeah, gang, this is
Probably not
again
wrong.
a little bit of a dry air, but that's okay. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. It's a Sunday, so it's weird for me. I don't usually stream on Sundays, but I'm excited to do this. I've been looking forward to this show for a while. It had to be rescheduled a couple times due to unforeseen circumstances, but we got it done, and I'm excited to have it.
Yeah,
with
me too.
that said,
I'm good.
okay, great. Now we can begin. Okay, so I guess we'll start by just having you both introduce yourselves and
hang on. Could you give me 30 seconds? Sorry, guys. Sorry. 1 second.
I guess we
second.
can. You know what? If we gave Erudite a little bit of time, we can give you a little bit of time. It's only fair,
sorry.
right?
Really quickly.
Okay.
I'm just going to post the link one last time.
You're fine. It's just
Thank you, guys. Sorry about that.
No problem. Gang, if you're enjoying this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I have a link to both Not So Erudite and Drew Pavlou's YouTube channels in my YouTube description, and you can click on there and give them a follow while we're waiting as well. Maybe pull it up and watch it on their end too, so you can have two screens open or something, right? But yeah, let me know when you're ready, Drew.
Yeah, no, we can begin.
Okay, we can begin. Well, why don't we start by just introducing yourselves, tell people a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then kind of, we'll start with Erudite, and she can tell us why she wanted to have this conversation or why she wanted to talk to you in the first place. So that's what we're going to do. We'll let you introduce yourself, Drew, then we're going to let Erudite introduce herself, and then she can open us up, and we'll start with there.
Sounds
Go
good.
ahead.
Sounds good.
All you, buddy. Go ahead. Who are you?
Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought Erudite should go first. Give Erudite the floor first, maybe.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're good. That's okay. Yeah. So basically, I've been seeing a lot of posts from you on Twitter. I watched as much as the live stream with Tally and Wick that you did before my flight took off, and I finished it today. Actually, I just finished the full stream, but it led me to like a lot of confusion as to like what your political ideology is. I'm like, I'll be super frank. I'm going to say this in like the most bombastic way, A, because the viewers love it, and B, because I just want to be like as blunt as possible, so that it doesn't feel like I'm like hiding motives. I can't decide if you're a grifter or not, essentially. And so like, I want to talk to you in like some level of good faith. Probably in part because I'm also in the middle of kind of ideologically wrestling for myself about like how I feel about people who label themselves moderates, which is a conversation I had with Ryan Mullally, and just like how to kind of respond to these different camps and categories within politics that feel like we should be under the same tent but aren't, or are proposing to me that we are in the same tent. In the case of
I don't think
Ryan
we are in
Mullally,
the same tent anymore.
Gotcha. He would say like, I'm a moderate, so we
respect.
like could be in the same tent, because I'm interested in reaching moderates. I think that moderates matter. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, basically. And if you were not in the same tent anymore, like what happened, essentially?
Yeah, sure. No, sorry for cutting you off. You can keep talking if you need
Nope,
or
that's it.
wanted to say anything. Okay, no, fair enough. Look, the interesting thing is I think we were in the same tent probably a year ago, or even as late as 6 months ago. But I've been wrestling my internal ideological beliefs for a long time now. It's probably something that's basically been years in the making. When Trump first got elected, I was upset. I was really.
Is that us?
For you?
Is that us or him?
I think it's him.
We're having a little bit of a
Hang on.
connection
Can you
issue,
hear me?
Yeah, now we
We can, but you're chopping in and out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Hang on.
Like
Is this okay now?
The NFL is back, and FanDuel's got everything you need to play your game, from same-game parlays to live betting.
1 second. That was something on my end. We're good now.
Okay, we're all good?
Sorry. Something on
No
my
worries, no
end
worries.
just went off. So, okay, we're good.
Okay, no worries, all good, man. Listen, I think a year ago we were on the same side, even maybe as late as 6 months ago. But I've been wrestling with an internal ideological dilemma for a long time now, even years probably in the making. And when Trump was first elected, I was extremely sad and I was like shattered. I was extremely upset with the first months of his administration when he was really harsh on Ukraine and I really disagreed with his foreign policy, etc. I've been happy to see that I think the recent, maybe like the past 2 months or 3 months, he's been a bit better on Ukraine, which is an issue that I really care about and is really important to me. But it's just a number of things that have basically combined to make me feel extremely disillusioned with the left. And this idea that, oh, well, I'm a grifter, I'm doing this for money, it's actually extremely not true. And I'll explain why. So in March, I wrote a Substack article called MAGA Maoism. And it was essentially like a kind of conservative critique of Trump and the Trump administration. Kind of like from a right-wing perspective in a way, because I was kind of saying like one of the major problems with Trump is his kind of like approach to politics is not really part of, I guess, like traditional Western approaches to politics. There's like a kind of like aspect to it where he was very anti-Europe for a long time. His approach to, economics was quite tin pot. And so like the argument that I sort of made was that it was almost like he was acting like a kind of like tin pot third world regime rather than the American president. And so it was a conservative critique of Trump, and it was probably the most successful Substack that I've ever done. And I made like $1,000, $2,000 just off subscriptions from that alone. And the Bulwark, which is like one of the major anti-Trump publications with like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, they literally shared it to their audience, and tens of thousands of people read it. And I was invited onto the Bulwark podcast with Tim Miller and Cam Kasky. And at that point, I was like fully within the sort of liberal tent. And I could have just kept on I could have just been like a sort of like a kind of like liberal conservative critic of Trump in a way, and probably made a lot of money doing that, because like there's heaps of money in sort of like the Bulwark, and there's heaps of money in sort of like that kind of Lincoln Project type conservative critique of Trump. I could have made a lot of money doing that, and yet I've gone the other way, and I've in fact lost a lot of friends because of that, and lost a lot of my audience because of that. And you could say, well, you're grifting, but the reality is like I actually had pretty large scale personal consequences for that. Like I lost a lot of friends. I lost I literally lost subscribers and stuff like that to my stuff because they didn't like the fact that I'd gone a bit more conservative. And
Dude,
it's just because.
Just for my edification,
sure.
do you consider yourself MAGA
Yeah.
now? Have you
No, I don't.
far?
Look, I wouldn't describe myself MAGA,
Okay.
but I would describe myself as kind of like a philosophical conservative. And look, like when the Trump administration does bad things, I'm going to criticize it. And when they do things that I sort of agree with, I will say that I agree with it. I'd say like I'm kind of like a not aligned conservative in a way. And I can explain that whole shift. There was so many different things that led to that, like one being the personal victim of crime, and then having a lot of leftists online sort of like go like, ha ha ha, like, well, it doesn't really matter because whoever stole your wallet actually might need it more than you. The election of Zoran Mamdani, and the fact that I saw like a lot of like kind of standard bearers of the moderate left inside the Democratic Party, like Ezra Klein, people that I really, really liked, kind of embracing him. And I was like kind of shocked by that, because I think Zoran is basically like a closet tanky. So stuff like the fact that like the Lincoln Project types, like these kind of and even like these sort of like moderates, like the Bulwark type people, they basically wanted to have like a kind of like united front with the leftists, like Zoran against Trump. And that was hard for me, because I was kind of thinking like, I kind of agreed more with Gary Kasparov. Gary Kasparov basically said like, if you want to try and create this sort of like popular front against Trump, but you're going to be doing it with people who are like borderline tankies, you're going to push a lot of moderates to just the conservative position. And something like that kind of happened to me, because I look at Zoran Mamdani and look, his actual individual policies, like free bus fares. I don't have a problem with free bus fares. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's more just the stuff like when he spent literally years talking about abolishing prisons, and spent years literally talking about like, Western civilization being this terrible thing that's like a sort of force for evil colonialism and racism in the world. It's just for me, there's a major personality difference between me and somebody like Zoran Mamdani. And so like these are the sorts of things that combined, I think, for like, and there's heaps more stuff like that as well. Like another really big one was,
I promise.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. So that's like a kind of like brief overview. And I would very much sort of like defend myself from the claim that I'm a grifter, because I could have made way more money as a sort of like Lincoln Project type conservative critic of Trump, but like I just
So I guess
I
to
just
push
sort
on
of follow
that,
my
I'm pretty familiar with the Bulwark. I work with a lot of the like kind of senior researchers on it. I've like talked to Bill Crystal before, so I'm definitely familiar with the Bulwark. The idea that they just have like lots of money to like throw at like content creators is just
not
like
necessarily the
really
Bulwark,
not
not necessarily
true.
the Bulwark,
Or the
not
Lincoln
necessarily the
Project.
Bulwark, not
Okay.
necessarily that. All I'm saying is like what I'm trying to say here is like, look, I gained heaps of followers. I gained heaps of support from those types of that part of the left or that part of the sort of moderate community. And I could have kept on going down that path and positioned myself in that way and probably done quite well for it. But it's just, I'd have a different philosophical change of heart.
Okay.
But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, yeah, I understand that you've had like a lot of loss. The issue is that like you can lose a lot of things and still grift because you value other things, right? Like if you're somebody, for example, who values money more than you maybe value principles, you might say, well, I've lost a lot of people who followed me. Not that I'm saying that this is you. I'm just saying like general, like Jackson Hinkle character. Okay. Jackson Hinkle might say, well, I value my principles a lot and stuff like that. But fundamentally, he wouldn't say this out loud, but like money would matter more to him than these things. And so even
Dude,
though
I barely make any money. I barely make any money. I'm just saying, I barely make any money for myself.
Stop.
Yeah, sorry, you go.
I'll let you talk. Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm not
okay.
saying that you've made money. I'm just giving
Okay.
a Jackson Hinkle example, right?
Okay, fair enough.
There are like underhanded things. So I'm not saying that you've made a bunch of money. It's possible
Okay.
that you've gotten like Twitter attention. I have no idea. I think the issue is that like when we think about grifting, I think we only think about grifting in like the lens of like a Tucker Carlson character who's like knowingly lying about Dominion.
Okay.
And is talking to his friends about lying, but does it anyways for like attention, right? That's just a liar to me. That's not really like a grifter. I guess it's kind of a grifter, but a grifter to me is somebody who like shifts over time because there is like attention and appeal in like one direction. So I think like when you look at like most normie kind of like just chatting culture people, I'd say almost all of them are going to be political grifters, right? They're going to be left because left is cool. And as left becomes less cool, you're going to see some of them trickle more right. They're going to want to say the word retard more often, but they're just going to trickle kind of back and forth between these two spaces, depending on who like wins the culture war. That would be like a stereotypical grifter. It's just like not that deep to me. When I'm looking at you though, I'm trying to figure out like, it feels like you had a lot of political philosophies that I'm surprised to see maybe were never true. I didn't know you
it was
super
fully
well.
it was fully true at the
Or
time.
maybe-
Like I was like a full hardcore convinced anti-Trump guy 6 months ago. And it's just like, what can you do if a number of like that famous quote by Maynard Keynes where he said, I changed my mind in response to basically new information. Like I changed my mind in response to new information. And that's how I see it.
So everyone says that. And what I'm looking for then is like a coherent answer to this, right? So like in the case of like talking with Ryan Mulally, part of the reason why I walked away very frustrated from that conversation is he was saying, I'm a moderate. I'm a staunch moderate. And I was like, okay, I have a hard time not saying it's valid, just coherent, a logically coherent system where you're politically informed to the degree that Mulally is, but you're kind of both siding to this degree. Because I don't know how we do that with where the policies
I can explain it more.
I don't need you to because you're not Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about you yet.
Okay.
Yeah, just pause. Right. So in the case of Ryan, the reason why I was interrogating him and the reason I walked away frustrated is I wanted somebody who I knew was very informed about politics to give me a coherent argument for moderatism, like the true both sides-er that I was hoping existed. And my walk away from the Mulally is he is really informed and his moderate position was incoherent, which is why he's now identifying as conservative. So what I'm trying to figure out is there a coherent explanation of your flip that seems so hard, especially now that you're saying opinions that aren't just about like pro-Trump or anti-Trump, but I'm hearing like a lot of like weird like blood and soil type argumentation.
Okay, I'm not blood and soil.
Blood and soil type argumentation that I was very surprised to hear from you because I don't feel like I would have heard that from you 6 months ago.
Okay. and I can go into this. Listen, I don't identify as a blood and soil ethno-setter. I do think that there is something to the arguments made about heritage Americans, heritage British people, heritage Australians, etc. And I can go into this. I think probably the thing that has been most influential in crushing my sort of prior liberal worldview. And listen, you were mentioning somebody who defined themselves as a moderate. I don't define myself as a moderate anymore. I define myself as a philosophical, civilizational conservative. The thing that flipped for me.
That's why I said you're not
Yeah.
Raleigh. Yeah.
So the thing that flipped for me is essentially I completely lost faith in multiculturalism as a kind of governing ideology. And that doesn't mean that I've lost faith with multiracial societies of different races living. What I'm talking about is multiculturalism, the idea that we are all just a melting pot. I think that there has to be a really strong, cohesive culture that everybody has to assimilate towards. Otherwise, my deep concern is that everything just completely falls apart and disintegrates. And part
Isn't
of this
the melting
is...
pot that though? Is the melting pot this idea? Like there's
I don't think so.
well, there in Australia and in Canada we have like what is it called? It's like, what are those quilts called that have like multiple squares or different colors? Anybody know what this is
I'm not
called?
Canadian nor Australian. I'm American, so I don't know any of this shit.
Okay. But we essentially had this view of like, let's just call it the salad model. That's not what it's called at all. I just can't think of this word for like the quilt, right? But in mosaic quilt, thank you. Okay. In Canada, we have like a mosaic culture view where like we have all these different cultures, but they aren't blending and merging in toward one another. Where the melting pot is specifically that there is a certain level of assimilation that's pressured. We just value all the different influences towards a greater, broader culture than towards like one specific monoculture.
I think the question is, I don't think that the melting pot is working in most Western countries right now. And I think maybe there is something right there. There is something you said there where you said there's a distinction between this sort of mosaic view with the melting pot. And maybe that's something to do with Australia and Canada, where I think, especially in Canada and Australia, Trudeau talked about making Canada the world's first post-national state, and basically was very proud in saying that there should be basically almost no cohesive majority culture that everybody goes towards. I think in Australia recently we've had Labor politicians talking about, they literally say Australia is a nation of foreigners, and that's the type of language they use. Maybe that's slightly different to America with the melting pot analogy, but I just don't think that it's actually working. And I look at Europe and I think it's not working. And I was going to go into this a little bit earlier as well. A major thing that led me to see the world in this way was October 7. I had heaps of moderate Muslim friends. After October 7, almost every single moderate Muslim friend that I had, and some of them were my best friends. I had people who were like I had literally been best friends with for years, and were completely secular. They would drink. They would basically never. They were just not religious at all. Like, they were very secular. And after October 7, some of these friends of mine became really radical and ended up literally supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, marching at rallies next to Hezbollah flags and stuff like that. And that is something that like shattered me very deeply. Basically seeing people that I was really close friends with embrace full sort of hardline blood and soil anti-Jewish type ideology from the left, from the extreme left. And I see, for 2 years now, 2 years, there's basically been really, really open examples of hardcore Islamist extremism out in the open in Australia, in Canada, in Europe. I'd say that there is a lot in America. There was the recent rally in New York City where people were just outright chanting in support of Hamas. This stuff has really shattered my faith in multiculturalism. The fact that I had friends who were basically fully assimilated and were fully secular, basically barely religious at all. And then after October 7, they went and started supporting Hezbollah and would now have hardcore sort of Islamist beliefs. So this sort of stuff contributes to me losing faith in multiculturalism. I think as well, like, part of this as well is I have become much more concerned about demographic issues. And so here's what I would say, right? If you look at Britain, in Britain, Destiny's debating this guy, Mohammed Hijab, in 2 weeks' time at Oxford Union. And Muhammad Hijab is like he's billed by the Oxford Union as like an Islamic thinker. Like he's supposed to be this kind of like mainstream, interesting, like intellectual, whatever. If you go to Muhammad Hijab's Twitter and stuff like that, he's like openly basically said, we are going to try and outbreed you. Like that's literally his words. He literally says, we're going to try outbreed you in the West. Now, that's supposed to be a guy who's like a mainstream Islamic thinker or whatever. He's openly saying that on his Twitter. And I look at, for example, the fact that there was the recent synagogue terror stabbing in Manchester. And in the wake of that, there were very, very like prominent Islamic figures in Britain who were supposed to be moderate, who basically started saying stuff like, oh, well, Israel brought this on themselves because they did all these atrocities and therefore people are just going to get angry and go stab Jews. And this is not just a figment of my imagination. I can point to multiple people like this. A prominent example, for example, would be Bushra Sheikh, who's basically somebody who's in the media all the time. She's supposed to be sort of like a mainstream moderate figure in British discourse. And she literally, her first reaction to the stabbing of old Jewish people at a synagogue in Britain was to say, oh, well, Netanyahu's the real one at fault because he created all these tensions. And now, here's the thing. If she's probably supposed to be one of the most assimilated and moderate voices in the British Muslim community, and she's basically immediately making excuses for a horrific terrorist attack, then I'm just really concerned for the long-term trajectory of British politics. So, for example, the Muslim community in Britain is about 7% of the population. If at 7% of the population, mainstream moderate voices in that community are justifying terrorist attacks that openly, what happens if it's 30% of the population?
Okay.
I think that's a genuine question to ask.
I think we, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to make this a conversation rather than like dueling monologues, right? So I want to make sure we facilitate like a flow there. If you had anything for this Erudite, go for it. Otherwise, I have a couple questions, but.
I'm just going through your Twitter because I just want to find some examples where I feel like your tone shift was like pretty much immediate. It wasn't.
I sent you
just pause. Hold on, I gotta pause you. Pause you because you've been blabbing for a lot, and I want to hear you out. I just want to be able to get my full thoughts out. My experience with you has been that like you've always been kind of like a rage poster on Twitter, which is fine. Like whatever. I can assure you, the last thing I'm going to do is judge people for their Twitter presence. However, it was a pretty consistent theme. That seemed like mostly liberal coded, kind of like anti-Hassan, but like also very anti-Trump. Kind of like consistent. And then it basically seems like at the Kirk assassination, there's like an overnight swap. Well, I'm not.
Prior. I can go into it a bit more.
So I believe you that you are saying that maybe you had this internal shift, right? The issue is that I'm just not confident that that's what I'm seeing on like your timeline. Like I'm seeing a lot of posting to appeal to MAGA right now that I don't see like when I search the name Trump. In like August. I know you want to go into it. I just like, you got to let me finish my thoughts. Okay. Like we'll let you talk through, I promise.
But also Erudite, I do want to see if you can address his points he made about Britain and nationalism.
I was making actual genuine philosophical points before. So you there?
Erudite. Hello?
Sorry.
Oh, did you have anything to say about his points about Britain and ethnic diversity and monoculturalism versus multiculturalism or anything? Any of those?
Because I am trying to actually explain my views at a deeper level.
I understand. It feels as though like when I'm listening to your explanation, I feel like what's happening is a lot of like a little bit of fallacious thinking where we look at the extreme like radical leftists, which I actually agree are a problem, and I actually agree can't be part of the left, right? I actually don't want these people being part of our group. And I think the issue that we're doing is that we're like conflating that to the rest of the group, particularly, and to some degree I understand, right? I think left-leaning politicians have done a really bad cultural song and dance where they've kind of pretended like they're progressive when they're not, especially at least in America. I can't comment as much on British politicians. I have no idea, right? But at least in America, there's been this song and dance where Biden and a bunch will kind of act like they're really progressive, and then all of their policies are really moderate lib stuff, which is frustrating for the leftists who are essentially having their culture masqueraded as to get the brownie points and not actually policied on, which is probably super frustrating and understandably frustrating for leftists and socialists, right? Where we're like, yeah, we're just like you. But it's also really confusing to the moderate, where we've been like, you're saying you're just like these socialists. And we're like, well, hold on now. Like, we don't really policy in that way. And we're not actually that crazy in like these sorts of ways, which I think leads to a lot of confusion for the normie. The thing that I'm trying to figure out with you is, I feel like if you're decently politically informed, you can do the difference between my cultural friends, these cultural movements, and the way that we're actually doing policy, particularly in places like America. I can't really comment much on Britain other than worrying it feels like you're doing a lot of slippery slope stuff, even though I'm actually quite critical of fundamentalist Islam. I do not want highly religious fundamentalist Islam like propagating. I think Sharia courts should not exist in Western democracies whatsoever. I'm completely opposed to that. The issue is that what we do see is that most people who like immigrate, even if they're very Muslim, become secularized pretty quickly. And yes, they're radicalized by October 7th. I understand why they are. The question is, are they actually now going out and supporting Sharia law and like pushing for that type of policy? In America, it doesn't seem like that's the case. Maybe it's the case in Britain. I have no idea. I know that they do have issues in Britain of like actual Sharia courts that exist, which I think is not good. I can't engage with you on commentary on Britain. I'm not interested in it.
Look, I'm trying to explain that it's not just American politics I'm looking at. I'm also looking at politics all across Europe and the West and everything. And probably a major way that I have actually broken with the left now is I do genuinely think there needs to be immigration restrictionism in order to allow for groups that are already in the country to assimilate. I think when the volumes of migration are so high, it becomes really hard to assimilate. And I'll give you an example. My family migrated to Australia in the 1950s and 1960s. I'm fourth generation on my mum's side, third generation on my dad's side. And when I was growing up, I was basically the only Greek kid in school. I didn't grow up in like a kind of like ethnic enclave. Basically, every single person around me was an Anglo-Australian, and so my cultural, like having grown up in that way, I basically fully assimilated as an Australian. And to the point that when I went to Cyprus when I was like 12 years old, the only time I've ever gone back to my family's home country, I did feel like a foreigner there. Obviously, I love that. Obviously, I do love I love the Greek culture. I'm still proud of it and everything. I don't hate myself for it or anything. I do love Greek culture. I talk about the fact that my family's ethnically Greek all the time. But when I did go to Cyprus, because I don't speak the language and because I grew up in a fully cultural Australian environment sort of thing, like I did basically kind of feel like a foreigner there. And I think a major reason why I was able to like basically like fully assimilate is because I grew up not in an ethnic enclave. I grew up in an environment where I was surrounded by the majority culture in Australia the whole time. And so that's why I now think that you basically need to have pretty strong immigration restrictionism, because over the past 5 years in particular, but also the past couple of decades, there's been massive amounts of immigration to the West. There's been mass demographic change. And I think when migration flows are so high, and this is especially a thing in Canada and Australia, but I know you guys also had massive amounts of illegal immigration in America as well the past 5 years. I think when the rates are so high, it becomes really hard for people to assimilate.
I guess like your family lineage feels like a good example of assimilate, like the type of.
But as I tried to explain though, the reason why I think my family were able to assimilate so much is because I didn't go to a school that was 99% Greek. I didn't grow up in a street or a suburb that was 99% Greek. I didn't grow up in an environment where everybody was speaking Greek around me all the time. I basically grew up in a fully Australian monocultural Australian. Basically, I grew up in a full monocultural Australian environment. And I think that's what allowed my family to fully assimilate into like sort of Australian culture. And I think they just need to...
Didn't like Italian and like Irish people, when they immigrated in really large numbers, especially for the size of the population of America at the time. And if we look at the Italian culture, like in America now, like they keep certain parts of it, I imagine for sure. There's a lot of people who would say like, yeah, I'm Italian American. But I'd say like everyone would look at that enclave of people, even though they had Little Italy. So they actually did maintain lots of like social enclaves. They to the level that they have places in New York and most cities that are called Little Italy. I grew up with a Little Italy, right? We have Chinatown, right? And I don't actually see like this major issue with integration necessarily. It seems like if you give it 1 to 2 generations, the integration necessarily happens because the family is typically coming here because they do share some fundamental values shared with the Western democracies, right? And more importantly, I would argue, I think Western democracy values are just sexy and awesome. I think most people, when they have to choose between like their fundamentalist parent who's being like, you can't talk to him, he's a man. And you're like, oh my gosh, mom, all of my girlfriends talk to men and it doesn't kill them. So lay the fuck off. I just think Western culture is also generally like more appealing, which is why I'm not like in this need to really do like forced assimilation. I think like melting pot just kind of necessarily happens. And I enjoy the little like cultural layovers that we have as a result of like us blending the communities together.
So look, lots of good points there, and I want to respond to all of them. One, I want to say I do actually enjoy as well, like parts of the blended culture. So, for example,
We all like when the fajitas be sizzling, right? You know, we
yeah,
enjoy
sure.
that,
Look,
you know?
I'll give you an example, right? Like, I think the Vietnamese community in Australia is a great community. They all came out after the Vietnam War because they were anti-communist and they didn't want to be persecuted by the Vietnamese communist regime. And I think they've integrated really well into Australian society, and to the point where, like, for example, like banh mi's are like are a really like famous part of the kind of like Australian tradie diet, which is like, you know, construction work and stuff. So I do like parts of the cultural blending. Okay, what I really don't like, and this is one of the big difficulties I think, is that you do get some of the cultural blending, but sometimes the underlying values are still so different. So I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of my Muslim moderate friends, like, their attitudes, I guess, towards like, you know, marriage and all these things, maybe they did become a bit more westernized on this stuff. But then at the same time, they still, at the end of the day, as soon as like the Israel-Palestine conflict started up, so many of them became obsessively anti-Israel to the point that they got radicalized and actually ended up supporting groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. And so this is a difficult question, Erudite. It's like, okay, yes, maybe on some level there is westernization starting up because, like, you know, there might be, you know, less emphasis on restrictive traditionalist views on dating and stuff like that. But at the same time, though, as soon as like Hamas attacks Israel, a lot of these kids who still might have those more moderate views on dating and stuff end up, unfortunately, supporting like a radical Islamist terror group. So that's a big problem, where it's like sometimes the cultural shifts can be almost superficial, because it's like, okay, like there's that superficial change in the sense that, like, you know, okay, now some of these kids are more chill with dating and stuff like that, but then they still support Hamas. That's a big problem. So that's one part of it.
The issue is like when we say, well, this is part of the issue, is that I think a lot of times when we say like people support Hamas, like even when I'm trying to think about like most like leftists, right? The problem is that, are you familiar with the psychology paradigm where you have 3 lines and one of the lines is obviously shorter, and they ask the group, which is the shortest line, right? And if all of the conspirators in the group always say like one of the other ones, they'll say like one of the obviously longer lines is the shortest line. If they all say that, the one test person will be pressured to say that, even if they don't think that that's necessarily true. And that's just like simple, raw peer pressure. And what I'm saying to this, the point that I'm trying to drive
that's my
here
problem
is
too.
that, well, I don't think you get what I'm going at necessarily.
Okay,
Maybe you do, but let me just finish my thought here.
Yeah.
I think that when people do like this thing, like, you know, supporting BLM or supporting Hamas or supporting any sort of political movement, I think it is fundamentally puddle deep for like 99% of people. And I think that there's caution that we should throw at that, right? How long did it take the Japanese, when they were sending in soldiers to China, to go from like living with their mothers and never having shot a gun to stabbing babies with bayonets in Nanking, right? I think in Nanking that took 30 days. There's actually a soldier who talks about it. Within 30 days, I was cruelly and heartlessly stabbing babies with bayonets, right? And so this fear of like, well, radicalism can happen so quickly, I think is bounded, but also we have to look at the fact that over time, consistently, our societies are not going that direction. And I'm not opposed to girding against it, which is why I say things like Sharia law should not be imposed. I don't think it should be allowed in America. I don't think, for example, that like you should be able to beat your wife and not have that be charged as an assault. I just think it is assault, and I don't care if like people might say that that's just like the necessary punishments of marriage. Don't care, not interested. It just is assault, right? I actually think that all of this happens really naturally and organically. And these puddle deep kids that are supporting Hamas, the issue is that you put them there. There's a very good chance that they don't, right? There's a good chance that most of these kids screaming about how much they love Hamas, or how much they're super happy that Kirk is dead, or how excited they are for the civil war to punch and bleed out Nazis, right? These people can't live without DoorDash for 2 days. They're empty and soulless in what they're saying. And I can understand being disgusted by it. What I can understand is shifting political philosophies as a result of it.
Okay, look, all good points, and I'm going to try and to avoid myself jutting in, because it's a bad habit that I have when I do streams. I'm going to try and write down my points so that I remember them without butting in. So sorry about that, Erudite, so far. Okay.
That's good. That's good.
So a couple things here. The peer pressure point is a good point, and unfortunately, that is also what I saw with my friends. So I had a Muslim friend who was like my best friend for years, and he had a law degree from Australia's top law school. He was a really smart guy. He basically had the exact same views as, say, like a Destiny type person, or like you, or like a liberal type person. So he'd like read The Economist, all that sort of stuff. We basically had the exact same views on all this stuff. And what I saw was the peer pressure. Like, so when October 7th happened, I remember he opposed it. He said it was disgusting. And then I think what happened is that he started receiving peer pressure from other people in his community, basically saying, you're a race traitor. And I think his views started shifting because he was placed under so much peer pressure. So that is, again, it is actually a really big problem, Erudite, because it's like...
Can I pose you a question with that?
One last thing. One last thing. I was going to quickly say, like, I understand your point that maybe these people don't really believe it. It's just a product of peer pressure. But it's still really bad that there are these peer pressure dynamics happening inside Western countries to support really radical groups. So
I would agree with that. Yeah, the question that I basically posed to you is that friend that's pressured in these ways, how likely are we to believe that when like something happens where maybe they have to go and kill Jewish people, are they going to get on board with that, especially if they're in America or in Australia?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is very, very unlikely. It's actually very unlikely. In fact, we see, at least in the last 30 years, typically it's more anti-government sovereign citizens and Boogaloo movement people who are more likely to be radicalized to the point of physical violence, right? This is an interesting thing about right-wing radicalization. It's at least in the last 30 years, their bark has meant a bite was behind it more often than left radicalism. That doesn't mean that either radicalism is good. There is this interesting like paradigm that's happening between these two things. And so while you're kind of looking at this paradigm and going, we could be 30 days away from these people who are now celebrating Kirk's death to like turning their guns on just an
Yes, that is actually how I see it. That is how I see it.
understand that. I understand that that's how you see it. And I'm saying to you,
yeah,
we're not, because we don't have any system top down, the type of shifting to cause, like think about the radical shift that happened for the non-king. Or Jean King. I think it's Jean King. I keep pronouncing it non-King.
Non-King,
one bad
I believe.
translation. You see a bunch of white people say that, and then like non-white people like it's Jean King.
I could be wrong. I don't know. On the look.
I don't know. Okay, but when you look at Jean King, it's 30 days feels like no time at all to cause such a radical shift. But when you think about it, 30 days with the amount of change that went on for them, as far as environmental context, situation, peer pressure, right? Top-down pressure. It's actually insane, right? And it's nothing like what we have on the left, because we would need to be seeing like left-leaning politicians girdering our group towards saying we should do violence. We should start doing these things. In fact, I don't see any of that from the left. I see a strong girding on the left right now against violence, while they're still willing to say, we hate Republicans and are pieces of shit, right? And so in the case of non-King, we have people who move countries to a group that they have been socialized to hate for probably their whole life, and they are put into a gamified version of killing where they get points and social clout amongst their soldiers, and they're surrounded by a bunch of soldiers that have already deadened themselves ahead of them to the killing and dehumanization of Chinese women and children. And so the process by which they get there is very actually understandable. And I would say to you, we're actually really, really far from that. Thank God.
I know. Look, I know that we are farther from that. I recognize your point that, look, my worst fears is that it's heading in that direction. And I understand that we're not 30 days out from that, but I think moving in that direction at all is a terrible thing for the entire trajectory of Western civilization. And that's why I've become sort of, in terms of my actual personality, in terms of my actual like philosophy, I'm conservative, because there's a difference between sort of like progressives and conservatives at a personality level. I think the difference is basically that at a personality level, progressives are often thinking, how much better can we make society? How much can we improve things? It's quite a sort of utopian type thing. If we implement the right policies, we can get to this better future. And I think in terms of my actual personality, and there's heaps of different things that have contributed to me thinking like this. I had a conversation with Dylan Burns, and a part of it as well was that I went to Ukraine in March, and I literally saw at the front lines horrific atrocities. I walked through the aftermath of an apartment block that had been destroyed by a Russian ballistic missile strike, and I saw still bloody nurses' gloves on the ground. Like I've seen, especially over the past couple of years, like how bad things can get. And I think this is the personality shift where it's like, instead of thinking, when I was 18, 19 and I was a progressive, I used to think like, if only we just put in place these 10 different policies and we could massively improve society in so many different ways. Now my personality, because of the way it shifted, because of, I guess, the traumatic stuff that I've seen, having best friends become radicalized extremists, going to see the front lines of the Ukraine conflict, being personally the victim of a crime, all these sorts of things. It's now like my actual personality is, I'm concerned about the prospect of civilizational collapse. I'm concerned about the prospect of mass civil conflict. I'm concerned about the prospect of violence. And I think we need to basically have, if the question is basically between, how do you balance freedom and order? I think in the West right now, I think it's potentially overbalanced in the direction of freedom. I still love freedom. I still believe in the fundamental tenets of liberalism, but I think there just needs to basically be almost as a cultural shift. It's like a cultural shift where it's like, I'm concerned that we are heading in a direction where everything is falling apart and collapsing.
But if we're heading in that direction, my contingency would be the ones driving that most aggressively, particularly in the direction of violence, right now is specifically talking about top-down organization, is Trump, right? And I just to be clear,
that's where I feel
disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you do disagree. I don't need you to do all the caveats if I don't like Trump or anything like that. But when you look at what Trump, Matt Walsh, right? They have been unironically refusing to denounce violence. That's absurd.
That is disgusting. I do agree with you. That's disgusting.
Well, the issue is it's not just disgusting to me. When we're talking about these top-down systems, like when I'm trying to think about what puts a group of people on the precipice of becoming non-king or going into civil war, there is the internal cultural pressure, but there is also a top-down guidance. And right now on the left, the top-down guidance, despite the fact that I think the left is cringe a lot of the time, they're purity testers, they're assholes, we have pretended to be just like socialists when we're not. I have all sorts of criticisms of the left, as I'm sure you've heard me make them. The issue is that our politicians have remained moderate in policy. They have aimed for bipartisan strategies. And when violence happened on their watch, like in the case of Biden during the Trump assassination, there was an immediate denouncil of violence, an increase of his security staff, and the violence was taken very seriously, right? Very seriously. Whereas on the right, what we're seeing is no acknowledgement of violence generally, we need to tone down, and a blaming of exclusively only one side, and then language like, I'm waging war on Chicago, the Department of War. We have an ethos of war, right? What we're actually seeing is a ratcheting up and a normalization on the right, specifically of violent rhetoric, violent justifications, and increasingly telling us that there is large swaths of people in our country that are domestic terrorists because of their belief system that might need to be radically and violently dealt with, right? That's concerning to me.
And I do, and maybe we've moved off this, and that's fine because this is still an important and interesting discussion. But to Drew, you mentioned a lot of things, and you also used it as like a defense of like your beliefs about immigration and heritage Americanism. But when I look at a Free Palestine rally in America, it's the whitest group of kids you've ever seen, okay? I need sunglasses. Like, these aren't immigrants pushing this. The kids and stuff like this, it isn't because of immigration. It's not because of people coming in from other countries and settling here and either assimilating or not. That's not the issue. So I'm just curious if you could tie these calls for violence, and again, even the calls for violence and the making fun of Kirk, whitest kids you've ever seen, right? You're wearing sunglasses to keep the glare out. These aren't like Mexicans or anything like that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay, we'll go into this. I see a comment in your chat that I'll quickly respond to. So it's a guy called Bilal, and he says, I think Drew Pavlou is becoming conservative because for the first time his Jewish instincts kicked in and he feared that Israel will no longer exist. October 7th changes paradigm. Now, firstly, I'm not even Jewish. Yeah, Wix chat. So
who was it?
So for this guy called Bilal. Now, I'm not even Jewish. My family background is Greek. I'm an Orthodox Christian.
Greek? Yeah.
Bilal has an Arab name. He is basically accusing me of basically being like a Jewish blood and soil, like it's a conspiracy sort of thing. This is an example, I think, of Arab anti-Semitism that I have a big problem with. And I think it's an example where you get these guys who are pretty progressive or whatever on a lot of things, but then they've got basically inherited Arab anti-Semitic tribal sort of instincts. I think that's really bad. Now, I will go into the sort of, I'm going to go into the point you made about the fact that a lot of the most sort of like provocative, extreme left-wing sort of stuff is coming from white leftists, and this is true. I think this is part of the problem actually overall, and I'll try to explain why. I think the problem is this. The culture, the mainstream culture, especially among white young people, especially people my age, across the entire West, whether it's America, Canada, Europe, there is a very strong sort of like civilizational, self-loathing, self-hatred type thing. We saw that over the past 5 years. There's like basically, there were massive cultural wars in America over Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, and it became quite widespread in university departments and stuff like that to basically pretend that every white American was the most racist person in history and that they all have sort of like inherited guilt from slavery and racism, etc., etc. So, what I'm trying to say here is this, right? I think there's a big problem where the sort of mainstream culture among sort of like young white leftists, the mainstream culture among young white leftists. Yeah, I messed it up. Sorry,
okay.
Yeah, that was funny. So the mainstream culture among young leftists who are white is kind of like self-hatred. It's kind of like anti-West. It's kind of like it's quite mainstream and popular to talk about white guilt, inherited guilt from like slavery and racism and all this stuff, like pretty horrible ideas that are that obviously create backlash, etc. And I think you're right that a lot of this stuff is actually coming from sort of like it's like a homegrown type hatred. And you're right, but I think this is the problem. New immigrants who come to the country, especially young immigrants, they grow up in that environment. They go to the universities, and all the white people around them hate themselves and talk about white people basically being
so that's not the immigrants' fault.
I know.
Right?
It's not the immigrants' fault.
They're assimilating.
You're right to it. Yeah, exactly. But this is part of my problem, right? If there is such a massive culture of self-hatred, and if there's no sort of like, if there's no kind of like cohesive majority culture that's sort of like patriotic and stuff like that for people to assimilate towards, then people will assimilate towards pretty terrible subcultures. And I think that is what's happening, where I said this about Zoran. Like the funny thing about Zoran is that, like, you saw some people, you saw the really radical MAGA far right people say, we're going to deport Zoran, blah, blah. I'm against that, of course. And let me try explain as well. My opinion on Zoran is this. I think he actually does have some pretty problematic views towards white people. I think he has like pretty negative views about Western civilization, all this stuff. However, I think it actually comes from the fact that he grew up essentially in a very white sort of leftist environment where he sort of assimilated to this culture of sort of like white Western self-loathing and stuff like that. And that is a big problem. And so this is what I'm trying to say, right? Like if we're taking in massive amounts of people from all around the world, and then the mainstream culture in America and Canada and Europe and Australia is to sort of look down upon the country, think that the country is like sort of like genocidal to the core, it's a racist country, white people have inherited guilt, then how are you going to have a positive story of assimilation? So I think that's a big part of it. And let me quickly go, so that's my first point, and we can talk about that soon. But I also want to quickly go to the MAGA extremism point. I want to first say, listen, I did find like how MAGA responded to like the Paul Pelosi attack, disgusting. I fully condemned that at the time. The response, the people who didn't take it seriously, the killing of the Minneapolis, the Minnesota legislators, I believe, I thought that was horrific. I thought that was terrible. The way that people on the right just did not take that seriously. I think political violence on the right wing is a massive problem as well. It's disgusting. I wanted to quickly say, like, I do disagree with the idea that the only people, like, I see Erudite make that point that, well, a lot of the mainstream left-wing politicians condemn violence. Okay, fair enough. I think the problem is, though, the information environment as a whole. When you have a situation where the most popular left-wing commentators are kind of cheering on violence, people like Hassan Piker 4 years have been cheering on violence now, and you have that information environment, and you could go on Twitter right after the day of Charlie Kirk died, and there were literally posts which had hundreds of thousands of likes joking about it. And I knew so many people, young leftists in my own social circles who I went to university with, who I went to school with, all putting on their Instagram stories, laughing about it, etc. I think the broader information environment on the left is still encouraging violence right now. It doesn't matter necessarily if the mainstream politicians are condemning it, if the information environment on the whole is quiet.
Yeah, who do you think has a bigger influence on the information environment, J.D. Vance or Hassan Piker?
I mean, obviously J.D. Vance,
okay.
But Hassan
who do you
Piker
think
still
has
has
more
a lot.
of an influence on the
Hassan does have a huge.
Donald Trump or Destiny?
Of course, Trump. But I was going to quickly say about Hassan. I would say that Hassan is probably in the top 10 information purveyors on the American left at this point, to the degree that he's probably as famous as AOC.
The issue that I would kind of say is the thing that I find incoherent, right? If like I think I'm gathering some of your principles, right? And I think that they are a lot of them are like philosophically conservative, which is fine. I actually don't care about that. What's confusing to me is that it feels like there's a lot more heat when you are talking about Zoran Mamdani or the leftist mocking Kirk than, for example, when you acknowledge that Matt Walsh was unironically calling for civil war.
And that's bad. I do think that's horrific.
That's what I'm saying, is you'll be like, yeah, of course that's bad. The issue is that when I go through the timeline of your Twitter, I see almost exclusively around the Kirk stuff posts about leftists having poor responses to Kirk, which is fair enough.
I can explain that.
I think it's because I made plenty of posts about leftist reactions to it as well. I thought it was a great moment for us to go, maybe these people don't get to be in our town square. They can like support us for certain rallies and stuff, but they're not in the town square. Like they're not. They haven't earned their way in. They don't have like the basic principle of like human life. But you don't have this. But then I saw Matt Walsh's post, and I was like, and neither does this motherfucker. I'm sorry. Championing on civil war is, in my mind, as bad, if not worse, than celebrating the assassination. How many more people die in civil war? What a blatant, complete disregard for the sanctity of your country and for the welfare of your neighbors, right? Than calling for civil war. But my issue is that if you're the principled conservative who would be like, for example, against people celebrating political violence, which it seems like that is a principle that you have, the thing that doesn't make sense to me is the asymmetry of the emotional size of reaction to the Kirk thing versus the Walsh thing.
Look, you're right that there's an asymmetry in my emotional reaction, and I'll try to explain that. I think it's probably because Erudite that I felt that I strongly identified as a leftist basically from the age of 15. So essentially, from the age of 15, my first introduction to politics when I was 15 years old was Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2015. I was literally 15 years old. I spent every day in class watching his campaign. I'd sit at the back of the class with my mates in Australia, and we wouldn't even pay attention in class. We'd just be following Bernie Sanders' campaign. That was my first introduction to politics. So I think it's probably my sense of personal betrayal, the fact that I identified so strongly for so many years as a leftist and as a progressive and stuff like that, and just the sense of betrayal that I felt that so many friends that I had were then celebrating the murder. And it was that feeling that I had on October 7 as well, because it's multiple things that have sort of contributed to this for me. It was the same thing on October 7 where it was like all these people that I had been friends with for years, and I had fully identified as a leftist for years and stuff like that. And like I saw them, you know, celebrating on their stories going, this is what decolonization looks like. We want to decolonize Australia next. And it was just that sense of personal betrayal. So you're right that I do have an emotional symmetry, and you're probably right. Like that is a wrong thing. It's wrong. I should be stronger in calling out violence from the far right people too. I fully agree with that. I think it's probably just a sense, Erudite, that I do feel this strong sense of sort of personal betrayal because, I felt strongly identified for a long, long time. Basically 10 years. Like, I'm 26 years old, right? So half my life I was a leftist. Basically, from the moment that I was sort of like politically self-conscious, from the age of like 15 onwards, I identified as a leftist. I was like a Bernie Sanders fan, all this stuff. And so I think it's just that sense of sort of really strong emotional betrayal that I feel, that people that were on my side and people I thought as my friends, and it's also people in my personal life, like people who were my best friends who then went out and did this stuff. So it's probably why.
I think that's very human, right? Like I even had to catch
Yeah.
myself a little bit ago around the Kirk stuff as well, where I felt like really incensed. And I think it was more directed at the left than the right. And I had this like little reckoning moment where I was like, hold the fuck on. Like, if I just step away and I'm not like feeling emotionally attached to the left, I'm just looking at these things. Inciting civil war and calling half of the country evil that we should garter up against, that's like the only time I've heard anything similar to that is when Vosh was encouraging his trans viewers to arm up and practice like with weaponry, right?
I didn't know that he did that. That's pretty retarded. I didn't know he did that.
It's not just retarded. It's dangerous, right? It's really dangerous.
When did he do that out of interest?
Years ago. I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago. Matt Walsh was doing this like to a much larger audience. And it was about civil war. He was calling 50% of the American populace evil. And it wasn't even just Matt Walsh. There was multiple pundits.
Stephen Miller, who is part of the administration, had made many such comments.
You have Trump who refuses to denounce when Fox and Friends rolled out the carpet to be like, yeah, but like we should denounce like all the right-wing calls for civil war.
Who's been retweeting you, Mr. Drew Pavlou, right? Has said something like the left is all coming to kill you. I believe that's what he said.
Look, can I say one thing here, right?
Oh, let Erudite finish. I interrupted.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know I'm taking a while.
Okay.
Just to finish my thought here. I understand the sentiment of being disgusted with the left and being more let down by your in-group. I remember when I left Christian fundamentalism. It's funny, I'm still a Christian. But in the process of working that out, I didn't go to church for years. And like, I couldn't be around Christians without trying to rage bait them by saying things like, well, like Paul's thorn was that he was gay. I was just like always trying to aggress Christians to react negatively to me because I was so angry at them. And so like, there's this human element where I understand that. The problem is that
I think that's probably how I feel now, with the left.
But you have a platform. And the difference is that I have a platform. So when I started going, I think I'm shitting on the left too much right now in a situation where the right is literally doing objectively way worse things right now, this is a problem. And I'm not saying you have to be on my team, right? What I'm saying is I think principles are things earned. And principles are not things that you just get to espouse when it feels good and your enemy's violating it. Principles are the thing that we have to cling to when it is not easy, right? Principles are things you habituate into you by forgiving your enemy because you believe forgiveness is the right choice, not because it feels good and not because it's enjoyable, right? If you believe that political violence is bad, even when the side that you're not mad at is doing it, the principle has to come forth first and foremost, or we're lost. And that's the thing that I'm getting confused by, is that people who I see say, points. I have these principles, it feels like they don't.
Okay, look, those are actually good points, and I understand what you're saying here. Look, it's difficult. The sort of same dynamic that you described, how when you left Christian fundamentalism for years, you felt a really strong sense of anger at those types of people and wanted to troll them. Look, I have a genuine, deep sense of a feeling of betrayal and anger towards the left right now. And look, it's not towards people like you, because you guys are pretty moderate and normal, and you've been respectful to me talking and everything. I'm talking more about people like, I don't know, even Destiny, for example, because I was like a fan of Destiny, and he was fully joking about the murder of Charlie Kirk and stuff like that. So it's like, I feel like a pretty strong sense of anger at all that. And part of this as well is... You might
be surprised to see both me and Erudite's stance on his making fun of these murders too, right? I don't know if you saw it.
I'm sure you're pretty
Well, he'd probably grant them. The issue is it wouldn't change my political principles. That's what gets confusing.
I get you. I think the problem is, Erudite, is that like it's that personality shift that I described earlier, where it's like I genuinely think it's a personality shift where it's like 10 years ago, or even 2-3 years ago, if you asked me, how do we change the world? How do we improve the world? I would have given you like a list of like 15 public policy points. And I would have thought, if we just get a majority and both houses of Congress pass these laws, everything's going to be so much better, blah, blah, blah. And same with Australia, blah, blah. But I think it's like this personality shift where it's like, for me, now the thing that I am so worried about is that how do you go forward, right? When you see so many friends of yours, so many people that you know in real life celebrating this type of murder. And here's the thing, like my parents are conservative. Even when I was like sort of more on the left, like I would always fight with my parents because my parents were always conservative. It's probably like that. I know Destiny's mum is like a MAGA guy. Like my mum was basically sort of like a conservative MAGA type. And I used to always have these massive fights with her in debate, but I still love her because she's my mum. Like you still love your family members even if you have different political views. And like she was somebody who liked Charlie Kirk, and not that she agreed with him on everything. If you asked her opinion on American gun laws, she would say that they're probably crazy compared to Australian gun laws and stuff like that. But she just probably liked his general conservative attitude because she is a conservative. And then I see these people basically like all celebrating his murder. And for me, the understanding that I have is it is actually a little bit. I disagree with and I condemn the exact language that Matt Walsh used, but that's that deep feeling that these guys felt that all these people celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder would also equally want to kill them. That's how I feel too. I look at it and I'm like, okay, if you're celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, you probably want to kill me too, and you probably want to kill my family. And so it's really hard to then say, let's tone down the temperature.
Real?
That is genuinely how
real?
I feel. I have to be honest, that's how I feel. That's how I felt when I saw it.
I grant you that you feel that way, right? And like,
Yeah.
I think the feeling of disgust, which I felt, I remember watching the guy like shouting, "Well, you shot Charlie in the neck." I thought that was really horrifying, and I made an entire video about it, right? A short about it. The issue is that like our feelings don't always lead us to like the why. And I'm not like an emotion naysayer. Like I teach DBT. I'm all about like combining logic and feelings, right? And so the feeling of like aversion, I think is something that is important here of going, there has to be a line about human dignity that I think is true. The issue is that escalating it to the assumption of, and these people would want to kill me and my mom. It's like, these people.
I know you guys don't.
No.
But
I'm talking about these people. I'm talking about the people screaming, "We shot Charlie on it."
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
I think
behavior.
those guys.
And there's a problem that we've enabled that behavior.
Yeah.
Those guys can't live without DoorDash. Those people are stressed
true.
because they have a paper due. I understand that it is despicable. And it is a problem that the left has, that we have enabled our young people, that they feel comfortable saying that to some degree, although we're not fully accountable for all of the extremism. Because if you go to the right and you look at what the young right-wing people are saying, they're saying things like when I made that very viral post about the De Carlos Jr. killer, and I said the right has no solutions for this, aka integrated care for mental illness. I
do disagree with you on that, by the way.
Sure, that's fine.
Oh, yeah, we'll go into that.
I got more death threats than I think I've ever gotten in my life. And on top of that, all of the quote retweets were encouraging the lynching of that man. Right? They wanted to kill him, and they openly would say it would be better if he was killed before he ever did any of it. Just kill crazy black people. Some people would just say, just murder black people. Now, the issue is, if I look at that, especially from a black person, it would be reasonable for you to go, oh my God, these people want to kill me. They're saying it. The issue that I would caution as far as political decision-making, if you're informed in politics, would go, they're probably fat losers who have never left their basement. It is horrifying that we have enabled on the right the dehumanization of people of color. It is disgusting that the right, especially the new right that is starting to pop off, is gross. It's very Groyper driven.
Yeah.
And also we have to hold in that space of going, most of them are bots, and the ones that aren't bots are fat losers who will never leave their basement and aren't that serious. But also they are feeling enabled to say that, which says something about the culture and the problem with radicalization. But we have to do all of these wings when we're thinking about this.
Okay, just a housekeeping thing, just real quick. Grassroots Hegemon, thank you for the $100, but you can't buy mod in my community. Yeah. you just can't.
You can in mine.
Fair enough. You know,
It's
don't try to
$1,500.
do that. Like,
can
just
unban
not
anyone you
something we
pick.
do. But I do
You get
appreciate the
2
donation.
people
Okay,
to unban.
that's it. Sorry about that. I just had to. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Look, you've made some really good points here, and I actually do enjoy talking to Erudite because maybe you're employing the psychological, cognitive behavioral therapy type stuff. I appreciate that. Like, yeah.
I'm
Look, like.
watching actually.
Okay, I get your point that the majority of people who do this stuff are just LARPing and they're not actually a risk to anybody. I do think it is a pretty clarifying thing though when you see somebody look, it's at this point, right, where I know that obviously I've annoyed a lot of people on Twitter for years. I'm nobody special. I'm not Charlie Kirk, of course, but it's pretty obvious that if I were to die in an accident tomorrow, there'd be so many people I know who would celebrate 100%. I get 50 death threats a day on average. So I think it is pretty clarifying when it's like, you see people celebrating these types of deaths. I know your point is that a lot of them are not capable of acting it out. But I still think that these people, by creating a general permission environment, are part of the problem, because
I agree.
It only takes, if there's 100 people cheering it on, it only takes one of them to then think, okay, my community endorses this. So I think
I agree.
Obviously the people who are actually capable of the violence are a much smaller minority. I think it is a big problem that there's a permission structure that's created by massive amounts of people, and I think it is a clarifying thing when it's like, if you see people celebrating these types of deaths, I do genuinely think that they would celebrate if I was to be killed. So that's part of it. I do want to say as well, with regards to the Erna thing, my stance, I obviously fully disavow all the people who were disgusting to you and said all this horrible stuff. I fully disagree with that. I do genuinely think the guy who did that deserves the death penalty. And I do think in general, you just need to be overall much harsher on crime. I think just the past couple years, it's pretty obvious that in America, a lot of insane homeless people were allowed to just basically roam the streets and just carry out terrible crimes. My mum was in America. My brother lives in New York City, and my mum went to visit him in October last year, and she was on Wall Street, which is obviously like a very touristy area. And like a random homeless guy like jumped out and started jacking off in front of her on Wall Street. And it's my own mum. So, my brother,
I will say, not to be like insensitive, I love hearing like middle class people talk about their homeless stories, because like my husband like grew up in a homeless shelter. I worked and lived in McCully, which is like the roughest area in Edmonton. And Edmonton is one of the largest homeless populations in Canada because we have such good resources. So they all move to Edmonton to access all the stuff. So I get it. I don't need to get into the IRNA stuff. I would basically say prison has never successfully made somebody not schizophrenic, but
no, that's true. I mean, that's true. Look, like the guy who killed the guy who killed Erna, at that point, he's obviously killed somebody. He can never be allowed on the street again. And honestly, I think he doesn't deserve to live after he murdered somebody in such a brutal way. That's it overall. My stance regarding the crazy homeless people roaming the streets committing crimes. I would prefer these people go into mental health care situations rather than all be imprisoned, especially if they have not yet committed crimes.
So
fair enough. But what I would do is if I was somehow God King of the world, I would somehow create a situation where people who are mentally ill and roaming the streets who have not yet committed heinous crimes, they can be put into treatment. The people who do commit heinous crimes, I think there needs to be very harsh penalties for it. And frankly, I do think that the guy who murdered Erna deserves the death penalty because it was such a horrific, horrific crime. And I just think it was just so evil what he did. I think it needs to have the ultimate punishment. That's my personal sense. Again, that's probably one way that I've become more conservative. Having been the victim of crime, it's very frustrating to me when people broke into my car, stole my stuff. I had all these leftists basically cheering on online, ha ha ha, Drew deserved it, or saying stuff like, oh well, you don't know, maybe the person who stole your wallet and stole this stuff really needed it more than you. For me, it wasn't even the money. Like I had sentimental like stuff from departed family members who died. I had sentimental cards in my wallet that I will never get back because some crazy crackhead decided to take not just my cards off my card, but just grab my wallet, dump it in a bin somewhere, take the cards, spend it on buying booze. If they had some honor, if they were a thief with honor, they would have just taken the cards, but instead they take even my sentimental heirlooms, and they care so little for, you know, beautiful things. And some people just, it's like that quote where it's like, they will just make a bonfire of everything you love. Like, unfortunately, I'm at a point where I'm very.
This. It's tough for me to empathize with this one, being like a pretty typical thing when I would like walk out of my house when I was living in Macaulay was like somebody injecting their groin like in front of my door. I think my car was broken into like 8 or 9 times. So like this isn't a dismissal of the crimes. Like we need more police presence and these sorts of things. This has never ever changed my approach to like policy, because I want efficacious policy, right? Like killing people for these things doesn't make them suddenly not have done the crime. In fact, if you kill crazy people for doing things while they're crazy, all it does is it makes you feel better, right? And it's just like.
But I think punishment is an important part of deterring crime. I think
it is.
Like my stance is
capital punishment of a crazy schizophrenic is not deterring anything, and deterrence doesn't seem to be very effective on schizophrenia. Right?
I think once you commit a crime that heinous, that you basically forfeit your right to life. That's how I see it. I think it's actually a moral thing. It's like you don't morally deserve to live after you do that.
Okay,
it's just too expensive on the system.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to. I don't know if we want to turn this into a death penalty debate right tonight. I want
just to loop
we
back.
Can go. Let's go to it. Let's go back to other
culture
stuff.
Structures, because you said something that I think was really good here. Going back to the thing, which was talking about like these structures that exist within a culture that make people feel okay to say such things is something that we need to call into question. And I would say absolutely. The issue that I have with anyone principled about this is saying there isn't a world where we're saying this, and we can be critical of the left for the media culture that we have enabled, the progressive culture that we have enabled. I think we can be critical. I think like we just like ruined movies for a while. Not good. Like that's terrible. We've like made a bunch of college kids think that they're fucking Antifa super soldiers, even though they've like probably never punched somebody before, let alone like held a gun or know how to clean it, right? Probably not good that these like privileged little white kids think that they're like Antifa super soldiers. But on the other side, we have like at a top-down level, a refusal to disengage from violence, a refusal to denounce violence, and a continual vilification of an entire other side. And so when we're talking about like this principle, I can happily levy these criticisms on the media culture of like Hassan, who is celebratory of violence against people. And then you watched him watch the Charlie Kirk shooting and you went, this motherfucker doesn't even know what violence is. He has no idea. He has no idea.
Yeah.
As somebody who's seen the Israel video, right, and who's seen like really awful stuff on the internet, and has exposed it in awful stuff. The Charlie Kirk murder was really brutal. It also like I didn't lose sleep over the footage of it because I've seen violence before. I understand how evil people can get. I really do. Which is why I hate when people call me naive, because almost everyone who calls me naive is naive. But the thing that I think is important here is, when violence was happening and the left was in power, while the media, I think, does have a lot of problems, our chief commander from the left denounced it, reached out. Trump even said that after his assassination, he felt bad ragging on Biden and Kamala so hard because they were so good to him about the assassination.
That's a good point.
And what we have in the culture of the right now, which just to be clear, they're just starting to have cultural power. They're just at the beginning of it. The left got really bad, but it took to this point, and our leaders still didn't cross that line. They're just starting to have power, and their leaders are already over the line of intolerable. And we have to, if we care about this principle, we have to hold the same energy. The culture media space is concerning, but it is not nearly as efficacious in that 30-day turning the needle of violence as the chief commander. Just not.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, and then I'll let you respond. We should have, if you are mad or upset or think what Destiny said about the Charlie Kirk or the Trump assassination shooting is bad or disgusting or immoral or whatever, you need to have that same energy when Elon Musk or JD Vance or the White House official account or Benny Johnson makes videos of him punching women in the face, right? Like dressed up as Batman. You need to have that same energy. And one of the things that I have an issue with, Drew, is I don't see that same energy. Does that make sense?
Look. These are good points. I think I did explain earlier that probably part of it is a human type response on my end, where it's like,
no, I get that.
The emotional
but
symmetry
it's
is probably. Look, it probably is mostly coming from the fact that I do feel a sense of personal betrayal from the people that I sided with for so long.
No, but just real quick. No, I get what you're saying there.
I've
But
got some points
your
on this.
emotional reaction, while understandable, does not make it okay. Like, I understand the
Okay.
emotional reaction someone gets when, like, they get really, really angry. That's a real emotion they feel. That's a valid emotion they feel. But I can still judge them for how they act on that. That doesn't make your actions.
So I'm going to go into this, right?
Yeah, please go ahead.
And
Sorry.
this links back into quite a few of my points. I was asking if before I sent you a link, Wick. Maybe you can put it on your screen.
Yeah, give me a
And
second.
it was,
Which one did you send?
Yeah, it was in our Discord chat, and it was
Okay, I'll
my
see it.
commentary about it was my commentary on the Bad Bunny thing, and it looks like I get that you guys are going to see it and you're going to think
You can
like, what the hell
you
does
can
this have
pull
to
it
do with
up
anything?
if you want to look at it. Is this it?
How do I?
Just hit
You
watch.
can just share your screen.
Well,
in
I'm
the
sharing
Discord.
it right now.
Oh,
Yeah, this
we're
is
gonna
what he
share
sent
the
me.
Discord.
Yeah, it's on the Discord thing.
If you
You see it?
okay.
Is it up?
Yeah.
Can you
hang
guys
on,
not see it? It should be in the
are you
Discord.
gonna?
I was just gonna just share your screen in here.
Oh,
so I can
okay,
pull it
yeah,
up
I
on
see
the
it.
screen
Yeah,
for
okay,
my
I can
viewers
see it
to
now.
see too.
Okay, I can see it now. So this is my intellectual sort of understanding of why I think the MAGA movement is kind of like leans pretty heavily into this authoritarian stuff, and they see things in such a desperate and existential sense. So, and it links back as well to my thoughts on changing demographics and stuff like that. So, and I know you're going to think like, what the fuck does SNL and Bad Bunny and Hispanic Super Bowl show have to do with Trump endorsing violence? Of course, I understand. I'm trying to make a broader philosophical point here. So, were you guys familiar with that commentary from the 2016 election where one of the top Trump supporters wrote something like, this is the Flight 93 election. And essentially they basically were saying, unless we win now, it's over for us forever. It's like Flight 93, unless we storm the cabin right now, the terrorists are going to fly us into the building. I think the reason why there is this massive sort of the way they see politics is in such existential terms, there's like this massive feeling of threat on the right. And I think the reason why they lean into this sort of existentialist language, they talk about a conflict in such existentialist, harsh tones. They are, I think in certain respects, you have cited good examples where they have incited violence, and I think that's really bad. I think it is coming from this place where they feel this desperate existential threat to the country. And I think a big part of it is the fact that over the past 5 to 10 years in America, but it has been happening for some decades now, there has been mass demographic change as a result of mass migration and mass illegal migration. And unfortunately, from about 2000 to about 2016, it was quite mainstream in democratic media culture on the part of a lot of democratic strategists and also politicians to engage in sort of demographic triumphalism, where they essentially would say like, well, because of the changing demographics in American society, because white people are on track to become a minority based on mass migration trends, therefore it's potentially the case that Republicans will never be elected ever again to the presidency and stuff like that. And I think that this type of commentary, it became so widespread and mainstream in American society for 15 to 20 plus years. I think it led to this kind of sense on the right and the MAGA right, that essentially the change in demographics in the society, the mass migration that was happening would result, and this mass cultural change that is happening, the cultural dislocation associated with mass demographic change, is going to lead eventually to the right just forever basically being locked out of power in America. The mass cultural changes, they're going to be oppressed, etc. And I think essentially this is the kind of thing that is underlying all this kind of existentialist language on the Trump right, the fear that they have, the sense of threat they have. I think a lot of these people genuinely think that they are, these people talking in the lead up to the election, like, you know, if we don't win, we're going to be killed and stuff like that. And Elon would talk about like, if Trump doesn't win, I'm going to be killed and stuff like that. I think
we lost him for a second.
Because of the mass cultural and demographic changes.
Okay. Do you have a response to that, Erudite?
And one last thing, I would say that I think the problem is that over 15 plus years, it's so widespread in democratic politics and left-wing politics in America to engage in that kind of demographic triumphalism and to talk about the fact that like, the Republicans are going to become a minority because white people are going to become a minority and all this stuff. And then also just you see the broader permission environment created by left-wing content creators and the left-wing culture. Because I think we would all agree that it does seem that sort of like progressive culture is dominant in America, even though the right is in power. So these people see that there's a dominant culture, and a widespread thing inside this sort of dominant culture is the idea that political violence against like sort of like fascists and Nazis is permissible. And then they identify a lot of MAGA people and a lot of right wingers as that, and therefore could sort of create this permission structure to violence against right wingers. So I guess what I'm saying here is,
can I close this out?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can take off the tweet now. So I'm just trying to explain what I think is the sort of this is why I think there is this kind of violent language on the right, and why they feel this existential sense of panic and stuff like that. And I think my point is that I think over the past decade, the left have created a pretty toxic cultural environment which has sort of made conservatives panic. And I think that is why they see politics in such existential terms now.
Sure. I guess I view this panic in the way that I view the satanic panic, right? I believe that there is this genuine panic, and I believe that it is almost entirely propagandized and created. I do not believe it is like born in some sort of reality. First and foremost, I don't think most conservatives are actually obsessed with the white majority, right? They're obsessed with the culture majority. Most conservatives, well, you listed white majority in your tweet, right?
I think they conflate it. Is my point.
I think racists conflate it for sure.
I think a lot of Republicans conflate it.
I think racist Republicans definitely conflate it for sure.
I think a lot of people, like, even if they wouldn't explicitly say white majority, they psychologically feel that white culture is under threat.
I agree. I just think that this is white preferentialism. Like, I agree. I think that a lot of people really prefer white culture all the time, right? And I would agree that dominantly white culture is the hegemon of America, right? When people say like, well, what's white culture? It's like kind of American hegemonic culture. But the issue is that like it's less and less white, which I think has been good. In fact, the more that we've like made it less white, it's been better. The problem is that we keep painting white faces on it. And increasingly, we've started going, maybe we don't need to paint white faces on it, right? What's one of the major...
Could you explain that a bit further?
Yes, I'm going to give you an example.
Yeah, but the thing where you said it's a good thing for it to be less white and stuff like that, like, I want to understand, like, what is the sort of psychological drive that makes you think that?
I think lots of cultures have a lot to offer and have always done so historically. And our society, Western democracy, has been very good at gobbling up other cultures' things. And then we just pretend that they're now, we won't call them white things, we just call them the hegemon. But we paint a white face on it, typically when we want a representative of that thing. Let me give an example. I think one of the major, strongest exports of American culture is our music. I think American music is at the forefront. I think it's leading all the way. K-pop is okay, but it's kind of all the same, okay? It's fine, but it's also all the same. Hip hop and jazz revolutionized everything. The issue is that when you look back at what blew up all this style of music, the king of pop was Elvis Presley, a white guy who learned from black people how to do music and then did black people music. And then suddenly we loved it because it had a white face on it, right? And nobody wants to call that white culture, although I would say the left is getting more honest about being like, yeah, that's like white people just kind of like stealing culture and then not getting any credit where credit's due. I prefer giving credit where credit's due. I actually am totally fine with white people doing rap and black people doing rap, but also acknowledging that like most pop culture and hip hop come from black culture, right? And we stole it and put white faces on it. And so this is a good example of something that I think the left has done a really good job. And there is legitimacy to the progressive frustration of the constant ransacking of cultural elements that are good and then painting a white face on it and being like, we're not being racist. It's just like, we're just the melting pot. And it's like, if it's the melting pot, it should have multiple colors because it seems like we appreciate multiple colors in our society now, which I think is a good thing. Erudite. And so I do think that there is this white preferentialism. Sorry?
Erudite, the king of pop is Michael Jackson. I don't know.
Sorry, whatever they called him.
Okay,
the
Michael
king of rock.
Jackson was the king of pop. Elvis Presley was the king of rock. I just want to make
that
really clear. And if you thought you got death threats before, just wait till the K-pop stands. Read this, see this thing. K-pop is okay.
K-pop stands are so sweet. They're not going to give me... K-pop stands are like
the sweetest. I don't know about that. Sorry, I just had to interject a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. just to apologize. Grassroots Hegemon gave me $100, by the way. Thank you, Grassroots Hegemons. Yeah, I will pause everything to thank you for the $100. Okay, thank you so
Bro's
much.
spending today, but go ahead. Yeah.
So sorry, King of Rock. I apologize for calling that. The issue is that the point that I was making is still the same. That he took black music and black culture and we painted it white and then we called it good. When the music wasn't like it wasn't transcendental because of Elvis, he was taking what he learned from the black culture around him. So I apologize for calling it King of Pop. It's King of Rock. I apologize. So that is a good example of something that I think the left has done a really good job on, is taking these things that we used to need to whiteify so that the general population could like it. And we've gone, that's probably not good that we need to whiteify these things. Like if we're taking it from Chinese culture and more often Chinese people are good at these things, why would we be opposed to having a Chinese person lauding this? And the problem is that the left also went in really retarded ways where it was like, okay, well now Little Mermaid has to be black because I don't know, for whatever fucking reason. And it's like, there are stories with princesses that we can make that's just organic and have a black person in it. Wait, there's A24 has been including multi-racial groups into their literature and into their media for a long time organically without this ham-fisted way. And so, fuck, I feel like I'm losing the point of like where I'm going with this.
You're talking about how white people had taken a lot of culture from different groups and things like that.
Yeah, right. To talk about the Great Replacement. So I'm totally understandable when people are concerned about our culture being usurped because they hear that Sharia laws, there might be some Sharia courts in the UK. And they're like, well, I don't want Sharia courts, right? The issue to me happens when propagandizing happens where we insist that this is happening en masse when it's not. And when we insist that the changes that are happening are bad when they are not, right? I think at one point, you in your post with Tali, in your talk with Tali and Wick, you were talking about Ilhan Omar, whatever her name is, the congresswoman.
Oh, Ilhan Omar, yeah.
She made some post about Allah, talking about Allah and how great Allah is or whatever.
She said, may Allah awaken the world to the hypnotization of Israel or something like that.
Sure. Okay. So she made some anti-Israel and Muslim post. I don't have an issue with this. You seem to have a really big issue. It would be no different to me, to be frank, than if I saw a Christian talking about the genocide of Darfur, even if you disagreed that the genocide of Darfur was happening, saying, may God awaken people to the brutalities of Darfur. I don't see any of this as different other than I disagree with her to some degree. Well, wait, not as much on Israel now, but definitely probably at the time she posted it. And I don't believe in Allah because I'm not Muslim.
Can I say one thing? So I wanted to respond to your overall point, but let's just go to that Ilhan Omar thing quickly. So that exact statement that she made, she said, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people. Do you think that statement is compatible with, mainstream American culture as it has existed for the past 200, 300 years?
Like white hegemonic culture, no. I just don't think that that's bad. Freedom of the principle of America, yes. The white hegemonic culture, no. But
it's like, is it a
freedom
good thing?
Of religion? Yes.
I mean, yeah,
yes. It's a very good thing. It is very good.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. I agree. Okay, I agree with you that freedom of religion is good. I've got no problem with people being moderate, normal Muslims. All I'm saying though is it a good thing for American culture and society that you now have Congress people who will literally who are basically Islamists from Somalia who then say, may Allah awaken the people to Israel, hypnotizing the world? Is that a good thing for American culture? How has America improved as a result of that? I don't think it is, because I look at her statement.
This is different.
I look at her statement and because all I'm saying is I look at that statement and to me it looks like she's taking the sort of clannish anti-Semitism of the sort of Arab/Muslim world and she's importing it to America. And I look at that, I'm like, is that a good thing for America? I don't necessarily see it as that. It's certainly a foreign alien cultural thing. And is it a positive thing? I don't know.
I guess I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if she's Muslim. And isn't she Somalian though?
Yeah, she's a Somalian and she's an Islamist because she's pretty hardcore about
she's Muslim.
Her political. Yeah.
So I think it is incredible that in America.
I don't think she's a moderate Muslim. Is my point.
I have no idea her religious affiliation, the degree of her religious affiliation. I think it is an absolutely wonderful thing in America that you can have a Muslim woman get elected. Yes, because I believe in freedom of religion.
Got no problem with got no problem with Muslim women being elected.
Problem with her saying stupid shit that I disagree with.
Okay.
No.
I've got no problem with Muslim people being elected so long as they have the same culture as the majority culture. And she doesn't have the same culture because she's saying Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people. She's basically got political Islamist views.
I can find.
How is that important?
Hold on. I can find plenty of different politicians making statements that are way worse than that, right? There was a Florida representative recently who was praising.
You're talking about Randy Fine. You're talking about Randy Fine.
No, well, maybe that too, but it was a
He's
lady.
a Florida congressman who's pretty crazy.
Yeah, there's a lady as well who was praising Putin for his comments on the Nobel Peace Prize with regards to Trump, like just thanking the Kremlin outright. Like, I think that's way worse for American hegemonic culture than anything Ilhan Omar has said. That's way worse. I mean, way more damaging.
That sounds bad too. But my point is, you're within your own domestic culture. You're always going to have your own variant of crazies. But it's also a choice to import people who also have crazy views on top of that. Is my point, right?
First of all, I reject the language of importing because it sounds like there's some intentional movement to bring in Islam into America, which is just the amount of Islamophobia in here. Which, to be clear, I just want to be clear. I'm kind of like Sam Harris. I really don't like Islam, just generally as religion. And I love that we have a Western democracy that will protect their rights to have their religion, so long as they don't impose it on other people, right? And that's my problem with the fundamentalist Islam is the politicization of it often.
Yeah, in what ways has Ilhan Omar tried to impose Islam on her constituency?
Can I go into Ilhan Omar can't do that right now because she's one person.
But she's a congressman, representative of her district. What bills has she even proposed?
Okay, dude, let me try to go back to what I was saying, right? I said this
sure, but can you answer that question real quick?
Yeah, I am. This is my answer to your question.
Okay.
Right? I brought this up earlier in the stream. You look at the example of the UK. The Muslim population in the UK is 7%. Already, you have some of the most assimilated, most high-profile British Muslims. They responded to the synagogue stabbing attack the other day, the terrible terror attack, by basically blaming Israel and basically making apologia for Islamic terrorism. So this is where I come back to demographics and stuff like that. Ilhan Omar, she has no cultural power really to change anything because I don't even know what the population dynamics in America are.
She's a congresswoman. Like if anyone has power,
I know,
she
but okay, this is my point, right? Islam is like what, 2% of the population in America, 1%.
I don't know the.
Do you think? I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. It's a very small number. I know in the UK, in the US, it's much smaller than Europe. Do you think, for example, if for example, America's population became eventually 20% Muslim, do you think Ilhan Omar and people like that would become more radical? Would feel like they have?
Not necessarily. No, because there are multiple periods of like Islam being very moderate and reasonable, right? The problem that you run into. I think he's frozen. Sorry.
Uh-oh.
I might have interrupted you, but I thought you would finish speaking.
Oh, yeah, we thought you were done, but you just your connection, man. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, all good. Sorry.
I was going to respond to you about the 20%. Yeah, finish your thought. And then
finish your thought then, yeah.
My problem is this, right? In all in what I have been able to observe and study, everywhere, like the British historian Tom Holland makes this point. He says there is no concept of secularism within Islam. Like it is pretty much a totalizing faith. There has not been that kind of Christian Reformation that we went through in the West, where Christianity was taken out of a large part of the public sphere and stuff like that. And so this is my problem, right? And this is what I'm saying. Do you think the culture would change if there were mass demographic shifts and there is no real concept of secularism within this religion? And even the moderate types that I have seen was in Britain. The moderate types I saw were still making excuses for horrible Islamic terror attacks.
So the issue, first of all, I feel like, how familiar are you with like Islam as like a religion or like the Quran?
Pretty good. Pretty. I've gone to mosque. I've gone to multiple mosques before in my life. In school we went to a mosque to study at the mosque. I've been to mosque multiple times on visiting days because I had heaps of Muslim friends prior to October 7. After October 7, I took out about 15 books from the library on political Islamism. I read through them.
So you're
I
then
think
very familiar. Yeah, no, I'm just going to take that for granted then. So you're very familiar that especially people who leave fundamentalist Muslim areas and Muslim countries, but there is a very common issue, even in Iran today, in Tel Aviv today, where they're kind of like Catholics, where like everyone, when you do a census, will be like, yeah, I'm Catholic, because they got like baptized in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
But like, they're not Catholic by anything that matters, right? They're fucking whoever they want. They probably use condoms. They're doing all sorts of very naughty things. They never go to church. They don't go to mass. They don't go and do, like, they're not Catholic by anything that's meaningful other than the term. And Muslims are even more this way, right? When I talk to like a lot of like my Muslim, they just are, right? Most Muslim parents, for example, who will be very not Muslim anymore, will insist that their children are good Muslims still, and their kids will be like, yeah, sure. Even though I know their kids are not, they are just atheists. In fact, a lot of them espouse to be atheists, but a lot of them will still end up signing up on the consensus saying that they're like Muslim, for example. This is decently common. I would agree that it's important to understand that political Islam and Islam as a religion is inherently more political than something like Christianity, right? But it's important to understand that even in Tel Aviv right now, there are radicals that support what the regime is doing and they support the regime. Most of them don't.
Iran, you mean?
All. What did I say?
I think you're talking about
I'm so
Tehran,
sorry.
Iran.
I'm word swapping really
fine.
poorly.
I
Tehran.
picking up what you said.
Tehran. Thank you.
It's almost like the left,
I'm just
right
word swapping.
wingers, right? No, we all make those mistakes. It's all good.
No, I'm just word swapping really bad. My TBI must be just bad today.
No, it's fair enough.
Okay, so Tehran. Thank you. So even in Tehran, if you go there and you ask the people how they feel about the government, how they feel, you'll see girls with their hair unclothed now. Even in Iran, where the regime is trying to crush people into being fundamentalists, there is a pretty high rejection of this. So like we need to be aware of the system by which Islam is fundamentally political in a way that Christianity isn't, and gird our institutions against that, because I think the blending of church and state, no matter what the church is bad. I don't like it as a Christian. And at the same time, not buy into propaganda of like fear-mongering about Islamic people, and fear-mongering specifically just about immigrants, because I think it's bad, right? When people are talking about cultural replacement in America, we're not really worried about Islamic people right now. We're mostly obsessing with like Mexicans, which is just like, I don't even know why we're worried about cultural replacement. Like the cultural values are so close there.
Look, the funny thing is, you're actually right that I've seen European right wingers and British right wingers make that point where they basically say like America's actually really lucky that like their equivalent of illegal immigration is Hispanic people who are still Christian and stuff like that. It's a lot easier to integrate overall compared to, hardcore Islamism that you see in Europe. I was going to say, like, look, here's a good example though. Somebody like Hassan Piker, we all know he's basically an atheist. He says that he's like a cultural Muslim, but essentially he's fully an atheist. He jokes and he boasts about how he goes to brothels and all this stuff. We all know that he dated a porn star. He supports LGBT. We all know that he's basically not religious at all. Yeah. Look, he's basically
true.
He's basically not religious at all. But the problem with Hassan though is that his foreign policy takes and his political takes when it comes to international politics are essentially the exact same as Islamist radicals. Like he's literally endorsing the Houthis. He's literally endorsing Hamas and Hezbollah. And so that's my big problem, right? And I know this is my problem, right? Like I'm concerned by this because it's like you get these examples.
He's not. Hold on, Hassan isn't an immigrant, right? Just to be clear.
No, yeah, he literally. I mean, he spent half his life in Turkey.
I could be wrong. I mean,
he was born in New Jersey, right? But he lived his entire life in Turkey until he was about 18 or 19. But I get that he's an American citizen. I know that he's American. He would say that he's culturally. I mean, it's pretty significant that he raised his entire youth. He was in Turkey. Like,
I just don't know enough about Hassan. Maybe you're correct. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
to give the counter to Hassan, how many Christian nationalists are getting increasingly popular? You've got Peter Thiel, who wants to just undo democracy and it believes Greta Thunberg is Peter Thiel. We can even dismiss Peter Thiel because he's a crazy person. Other than
I don't
he
know if he's
definitely
crazy,
doesn't.
but I don't. I wouldn't
Watch his
necessarily agree with
interviews. He's a fucking crazy person. That doesn't
that.
mean
I
he's
think
not.
he has a lot. I think he has a lot of interesting insights, but
I think Greta Thunberg is literally the Antichrist in like a.
I actually somewhat agree with him.
Do you hold on?
You think that in Revelations,
As a
that
as
she
like a
has
metaphor,
the mark
as like
of
a
the
metaphor.
beast in his
yeah,
country's
he's not making a
eyes?
metaphor. He's not making a metaphor. Just to be clear, Peter Thiel's not making a metaphor.
I do think Greta Thunberg represents a metaphor for Western self-loathing. I do actually agree with that though. Her whole thing is like sort of like deindustrialize the West.
Okay, but I just
like,
want to be
destroy the
very
West
clear
in a way.
that the Antichrist is something completely different, not at all connected to that. The Antichrist is something very religious on a fundamental level that is meant to basically
I don't think
control the world where everyone would praise them and then like usher in the
I don't think he means she's the literal Antichrist. I think he's talking about it as a metaphor. And
No,
I would agree as a metaphor.
No.
I watched the interview. I think he's talking about it as a metaphor. I think he was talking about it as a metaphor. And I think as a metaphor, he has a good point in the sense that, like, she is somebody who was fully praised and held up by the elites. But at the end of the day, like, she is basically sort of like, her entire politics are sort of like Western self-loathing. Like, she's just constantly advocating that the West deindustrialize, the West, like, sort of like take itself apart for its historical guilt, etc. So actually, I would agree as a...
is dehumanizing her and potentially inciting violence against her.
I don't think it's inciting violence against her. I think he's talking in terms of metaphor.
But you do think that calling people fascists is inciting.
Also, didn't a whole Mormon church get shot up because the guy believed that they weren't really Christians and that they were like just like Satanists in disguise?
I don't know. I don't know much about the Mormon church thing. But look, going back to the core point though about Hassan, because I guess we did get a little bit.
Yeah, we did get distracted.
But the core point though, the reason I brought up Hassan is like he's culturally fully American. That's pretty obvious. He's basically fully American in terms of his culture. He's basically not religious at all. The problem is though, probably for some kind of weird personal identity crisis type thing that he has within him, he still identifies as like sort of a Muslim culturally. Even though I think in terms of his actual culture, it's pretty obvious that he's fully American. But he identifies as a cultural Muslim. That's what he talks about. He says he's not really religious, but he's culturally a Muslim. And his political takes when it comes to foreign policy and international politics are almost indistinguishable from a radical Islamist. So I think that is a big problem where you do have some level of assimilation. Like Hassan, of course, is basically like 100% fully assimilated as an American. But then this kind of weird internal identity dynamic that he has, some kind of identity struggle that he has, leads him to essentially have the same foreign policy takes as a radical Islamist. And I think that is a big problem. And he literally has endorsed radical Islamist groups.
Sure, and I can agree that I think that like his foreign policy takes are fucking shit, right? The issue is that, again, when we're doing the comparing and contrasting, what's the central principle here that you care about?
Like this is the point, right? Like, okay, like you were for example, not okay. Like I'm gonna say this, and it's a bit facetious. Like it's a bit of a satirical take on your point. Your kind of point before was, well, because like there's kind of like secularizing in their personal attitudes towards things like, you know, gender and sex and stuff like that, they're becoming more assimilated into Western culture. My take would be that, like,
my point.
You were kind of saying that like Muslim youth in the West have adopted generally kind of more towards sex and gender and these types of things, right?
I don't think I said anything about sex and gender. Secularized, yes.
Dating
they're like
and stuff
Catholics.
like that.
They're like Catholics.
Yeah.
So they're like Muslim in name only. Yes.
You were sort of saying that about like how you know they're like the Muslim youth, the Muslim friends that you have, like they have quite liberal attitudes towards dating and stuff like that that basically don't align with hardline fundamentalist views. This is my sort of response to that though, and again, I'm taking the piss of it because I get that your point is more deep than this, but my point is this: I don't think the fact that Hassan Piker went to that brothel in Germany means that he's just as fully assimilated as everyone else, but he can still support the Houthis. Do you get what I mean, right? Like it's one. If he goes to the brothel in Germany, good for him. I don't think that's a good thing. Like, it's a bad thing, right? But
Sure.
I wouldn't look at
what you're outlining
do you get
is my issue.
but do you get
my
what I
issue,
mean, though? Like,
I do, but the
I'm
issue
more
is what we're talking.
I'm
Well,
more
hold on, one
interested in the
at a
fact that
time,
he's
one
the
at a time, one at a
most-
time, one at a time,
Yeah.
one at a time.
Just
Can I
to,
say
I
one
guess to
thing?
butt in.
Yeah.
This is kind of my point, right? Though, is that
Yeah.
on the left you have a lot of these like radical LARPers who pretend like they're so
Yeah.
extreme and they're so tough, and then they're like, "You should go to Israel," and he's like, "I'd get killed." And no, he wouldn't. If Hassan went to Israel, they wouldn't kill him. That would be so fucking stupid. And also, it's
I think
still
at this
a
point,
democracy.
they wouldn't let him in.
No.
Realistically, they wouldn't let him in, but yeah.
If anything, they just would bar him from entry of the country.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
even then,
yeah.
they probably wouldn't. Even then, they probably wouldn't.
They let
should.
like I've seen them
Regardless, I don't
let
care.
in a
I
lot
don't
of-
care. I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about
Yeah.
this. What you're pointing to is Hassan, who's got all this bark. He's so loud and he's so radical and he wants to do blood. And I think he has contributed to some of the flagrant anti-Semitic murders that have happened in America with his rhetoric. I think he genuinely has done that. However, and so I can criticize him.
pretty bad.
openly as
That's
a
pretty
pundit.
fucked.
Yeah, I think it is really bad. But you're using him as a case example of the individual. So remove the platform from Hassan, which we can all agree he abuses and radicalizes people with. The individual of Hassan is a great example of somebody who is absolutely a cultural Muslim. I'd say he's more radical in a lot of his foreign policy, but not extremely. There's a lot of Muslims that are very, very anti-Israel. Right? The issue is that what you essentially now have is a hedonist with a lot of shit foreign policy takes, right? That mostly goes to like Coachella and spends money and participates in the American dream, right?
Okay, this is true.
On the right, just to finish my thoughts, on the right, you have people who not only are advocating for Christian nationalism, but live it out, are trying to make it happen, and are making boots on ground advancements for that specific thing to happen. My concerning thing with left and right radicalism is that the left radicalism is bad and it is a problem and it does sometimes lead to violence, which I condone and I think we need to kick out of our party entirely. The issue that we have on the right now is that they fucking mean it when they say it, and they're definitely a lot more dangerous, right? And so you do have Christian nationalists right now at Trump's ear. Even Kirk actually pushed a lot of Christian nationalism, which I think is fundamentally anti-American and anti-Christianity. But that's a whole other conversation for another
Can you quickly
day.
explain? Can you quickly explain what you mean by Christian nationalism?
Christian nationalism would basically argue that they want to ensure that it is a requirement that people are at minimum Christians if they are holding leadership. And in the extreme, Christian nationalism often becomes some sort of theocracy. So it ranges from all of that. I don't think all of them are theocrats, but a lot of them are going in that direction where they would say you can't even hold office if you're not Christian, which I think is really bad.
Okay. Look, to clarify, I am a Christian, but I don't like fundamentalist views in any religion, and I don't want a theocracy, and I don't want to bar people from other religions.
So to be
I do
clear,
think
you're
that
not a
America
Christian nationalist.
No, I'm not a Christian nationalist,
Okay,
but
just
I do.
making sure.
But I do think though that people who are non-Christian should respect Christian culture in America and stuff like that. That's just my personal take.
Yeah, but would you
I think it'd be
consider
bad.
that for other cultures? Like, would you consider the people in America should respect Jewish culture, for example?
Yeah, sure. But I.
How about
but I think
Muslim
there's also
culture?
Look, what I was going to say, what I was trying to explain, right, is it's
I
the same
understand,
as
but
me
can you
going to Japan.
just real quick before you explain more, can you answer my question because I'm trying to understand what you
About
mean.
Muslim culture. I mean, it depends what you think by what you mean by.
I'm
Muslim
not talking
culture.
about
Like, do
Islamism.
Call to prayer.
I'm talking about just
Can they
Muslim
have call to
culture.
prayer if the city votes for it and they are good with it? Can they have call to prayer?
Yeah, well, like just to
I
be
think-
more clear,
I don't
do you
like
think
call to prayer. I don't
Dearborn,
like call to
Michigan is a
prayer. I think it's a
problem?
public.
But do you
I think
think
people-
it's
I
okay
think
to
there are
have
problems.
Catholic
Just real
Church?
quick, Erudite, please. Do you think Dearborn, Michigan is a problem, Drew?
I think there are hardcore problems. I think there are problems with hardcore Islamic extremism in Dearborn, Michigan. I think there are some big problems with that. Yes.
What about Catholic churches ringing the bell for like major holidays?
Yes, I'm completely fine with that because that's been part of American culture. I mean, Christian churches ringing bells has been part of American culture since America was founded, whereas like Islamic call to prayer has not been. So like this is probably where we do really differ, where I think there's a majority culture in that country that should be respected. And it's like if I went to Japan, like I would not want to disrespect Japanese culture. I would
Japan is not
understand that there's a
America,
majority.
right? Japan is
Like-
an
like-
ethno-state in a way that America is not, because America is built on the fundamental principle.
But
We're fundamentally taking the land over from natives who are allowed to live, so they still exist here. Right? So we are we have colonized land. We won the war. Okay, we colonized the land, and then after that, it's a whole bunch of immigrants who got together and got fucked over by the British for long enough that were like, fuck you. And then they cleaved, right? So Japan is not comparable to America.
Okay, I get you. It's not fully comparable, but do you think that there is at least a majority culture in America that has been there for hundreds of years that should be respected? Or do you think it's just a full blank slate?
I don't think it's a blank slate. The culture, though, I think is very different than what you're purporting the culture to be, right? I think the fundamental American principles are a lot more around things like
if you polled the American public,
speech.
if you polled the American public just on this question, right? I'm not talking about banning it, but just on this exact question. If you polled the American public, do you believe that the Islamic call to prayer blasted on loudspeakers is part of American culture?
No,
it would be like 80%.
Most,
no. Yeah.
American culture is complicated because, again, when you talk about Japanese culture, there's something. It's been an ethno-state for hundreds of years, and they've kept it that way very intentionally. In fact, are now bringing immigrants because there's no young people to fill jobs, and they're freaking out about it because they've been an ethno-state for so long. When you're talking about American culture, it's way more tricky because part of the American backbone and principle is built on this acceptance of movement of new bodies into the country, into immigration, into new ideas. The founding fathers literally did something nobody had ever done before. So the American culture is to some degree a lot more of a living creed than something like Japan maybe even is, which even Japan has had major shifts, obviously, as well in its culture. And so is it what people view as American culture? No, of course not, right? Because white hegemonic culture is what people view as American culture. The issue to me is, would it violate American principles? Because American culture is fundamentally oriented around the things that you all believe in, which is why America, I think, is awesome, because it's built around the core principles of Western liberal democracy more than anything else. And that's why I really love America. And so while I agree, most people wouldn't want calls to prayer in their city, and I would say that it has to be something that's maybe voted on for it to happen, right? Or it would have to happen in a city that's dominated mostly by Muslim people. I don't necessarily have an issue with it. It's not going to get rid of cowboy culture, right? America culture is so diverse. It's cowboy culture, it's skiing and winter culture, it's lumberjack culture, it's fishers on the East Coast, it's surfers on the West Coast, right? And so when you're talking about American culture, it's actually really fucking diverse. It's just generally kind of hegemonically white. But I don't think people would cling to that. I don't think people would be mad if everything was identical, but everyone was a little bit muddy brown. I don't think it would actually be that big of a deal.
Sorry, could you say that? So could you say the last thing again? Because I didn't hear you properly.
Say we transplanted every living American right now into a new body, and all of those bodies were brown, but everything else was identical. I actually don't think it would matter that much, and I think most people.
This is the thing, though. I think this is the thing, though. Look, when I talk about this stuff, I'm not talking about people's skin color. I think skin color is just it's a very superficial thing, obviously. What we're talking about is something that goes much deeper. And I think this is the difference between the conception of a nation as sort of a shared community that with Ancestry being a big part of it and a kind of more blank slate understanding of it.
Ancestry is just not a big part of American culture or Australian culture for that matter, or Canadian culture.
It is for a significant amount of the population.
Okay, well, you can scream yes, you can scream no. Let's get some arguments here. Can you give us, Drew?
Let me go.
I'll let you go. I'm giving you the mic right now. But just to be clear, what I want here, and then I want Erudite to do the same for the no position. I want you to give me an argument about why you think the heritage or the ancestry of an American, a Canadian, an Australian, right, is part of the culture. And Erudite, once he's done, I want you to give me the argument of why it's not. That's what I want. Go ahead.
Okay. I just think fundamentally you can't swap out. So this thought experiment that Erudite just proposed, I think it's quite indicative of the difference in our mindset, because I just don't think just the idea, for example, of everybody magically swapping bodies overnight. That's just not something that it just does not compute in a sort of conservative nationalist worldview, because we don't conceive of human beings as just being radically contingent. It's that kind of thing, Rawls, for example. Rawls talks about the veil of ignorance. You should try and reason from society behind a veil of ignorance, assume that you have no idea who you're going to be, you don't know who your parents will be, you don't know anything about your community. But a conservative, it's literally a personality difference by contrast to that sort of veil of ignorance type approach, where you try and imagine you try and reason through from abstract principles, and you try and conceive of yourself as sort of like a radically isolated or individualistic, atomized person. A conservative nationalist will say, no, I am fundamentally rooted in my community. I'm fundamentally rooted in my nation. I have this shared ancestry. It's not a question of me randomly being born in America. It's actually instead having been born as a result of two particular parents meeting, falling in love, creating a family, generations of prior ancestors doing that. And I think this is not just about, I understand that America does have a very strong philosophical founding tradition, but I think at the same time, there's also been a nationalist component there as well. It goes in cycles, right? So this idea that America's always been a melting pot, that would be it kind of falls down when you look at the cycles in American history. It goes through cycles where there are decades and periods where there is greater acceptance for migration and cultural diversity and stuff like that, and then there are clampdowns. And you can kind of look at this current cycle of clampdown, I think, as analogous to the type of clampdown that took place, I think, after the Ellis Island level. So you had the Ellis Island wave of migration, where for a long time, America almost had a kind of open border policy with Europe. And then eventually, and I actually wanted to make this point earlier in the debate when Erudite brought up the Italian ways of migration to America. If you actually look at that, there was actually backlash with that, and there were problems associated with assimilation and stuff like that, even with Italian and other migrant groups. There was, for example, the mafia. That was a really, like, American cities and American police departments struggled with that for literally decades to get a clamp on that. And there was the Immigration Restriction Act, I believe, right before the Great Depression or around that time period. That was a kind of response to that Ellis Island period. So my point here is that exactly, I do see that there is this really strong philosophical position in favor of sort of like melting pot diversity, but it also does go in waves and cycles in American history where there are also periods where it becomes clamped down as well.
I'm going to ask you a direct question, right? Just a hypothetical, maybe. You have two families, both who have been here since the dawn of America, right? Like since they came in with the Mayflower, right? One of those families has a biological child. The other family adopts a child from, I don't know, say Japan. Which one of those children is more American?
I'm just gonna run to the washroom while you guys do that.
I mean, look, that's actually a good question.
Is it a good question? Which
I mean, they're both
one?
basic. They're both. I think essentially they're both fully American because they both.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
And this is why ancestry does not matter.
To a degree, because
why?
I think
if what you just said, if what you just agreed with is true, and I think it is, right? I think you're correct. Then why does ancestry?
I'll explain.
matter?
I'll explain. Right. Let me explain. In that exact thought experiment that you just proposed to me, in both scenarios, the child has the exact same historical, cultural line of transmission.
But he has a very different ancestry.
But the ancestry, yes. But because essentially he would be raised by these parents who were direct descendants of the Mayflower, he has that 400-year line of cultural transmission.
So let's do this.
That's what
you
I'm
have
talking
a
about.
family that came in on the Mayflower, and they adopted a German. Then that family adopted a Japanese person.
Can I say one
down
thing?
and down and down until the modern day. How American is that person?
In that example, that's a funny example that you've made, but in that one, I mean, this is like you're doing Ship of Theseus type stuff.
I'm just getting at the point of ancestry. Doesn't matter.
And this is my point. But let me explain. Right, for me, it's not necessarily about the blood or for me, it's not a blood and soil type thing. It's about
ancestry is a blood and soil type thing. Like the argument of ancestry is de facto.
You just heard me.
Blood and soil.
Okay, but you just heard me agree with you that the adopted Japanese kid of a family that descends back from the Mayflower would be just as American.
Incongruity between your two
I'm explaining
positions.
it. I am explaining it. I am explaining it because I just explained to you. For me, it's not about the blood necessarily. It's about the cultural line of transmission. So that Japanese kid with the parents who are Mayflower descendants, they have basically a 400-year unbroken direct cultural line of transmission down from the Mayflower. And that is that. So for me, it's not about the blood. It's not about blood necessarily. It's not about DNA. It's not blood and soil. It's about the cultural line of transmission. And I also believe, and this is where I diverge from like the white supremacists, the white nationalists, and the white ethnostaters. I believe that African Americans are heritage Americans too, because they also have that 400-year cultural line of transmission. And here's another point as well. And I made this point recently. There is a difference between an African American and an African migrant to America in the modern day. And the difference is this, right? I had a Nigerian philosophy tutor at university, a political philosophy tutor. And he made this point to us. He said, listen, if I moved to America tomorrow, I would be an African migrant to America, but I would not necessarily be African American per se, because I did not have the 400-year direct unbroken transmission, the cultural line of transmission.
Okay. Oh, is that me? No, it's him again. Damn.
No, it's him.
You're getting cut off. And it's
Sorry.
not,
do you get that? Do you get that?
I don't.
Can you hear
I'm
me
gonna
now?
be real with you, Drew. I don't understand, and the reason I don't understand, if I could just get this out uninterrupted just real quick, the reason I don't understand is because you will say things like ancestry matters, ancestry is important, ancestral transmission is important.
It's not the only thing. It's not the only thing, as I've said.
Sure. But the word ancestry means direct blood descendant, right? And so you're using a word
but I have
that
a
is
pretty
not
open view of
correct
ancestry
for the type of rhetoric that you're because if you agree with me on my hypothetical, you have two families identical in every way. One has a blood child, right? They do it the old-fashioned way, right? And they get a child, and the other adopts, but they're both the same amount of American. Then necessarily, what you are saying is that the blood does not matter.
Okay. But as I just explained to you, I have a relatively open view of ancestry to the point that I think the adopted child of Mayflower descendants would basically be almost as, like, basically the same level of American as somebody
use a different word, because when the problem I have with you using ancestry is a lot of bad actors are using that word, right, in a way that actually means ancestry. And then it's like people who use socialism that don't actually mean socialism. They mean capitalism with some more regulation, right? They're advocating for something that is absolutely being weaponized and used by people who want what the actual word means.
But like, you heard me though, right? Like what I said is what I'm interested in and what I like to preserve is the direct cultural link of line of transmission from the founding of the country.
I don't think the line of transmission matters either. If you had a Japanese baby that was transplanted here and they were taught and raised in a school in a community, right, that had also just come here, as long as they're teaching American values, I don't care if they have ancestry back to the Mayflower or not.
Let me ask you this.
It doesn't matter.
Let me ask you. Look, I don't think people should be discriminated against based on Mayflower status. Of course not. That's stupid. All I'm saying though is that there is basically a direct cultural line of transmission from the people who founded the country, and I think that line of transmission shouldn't necessarily be broken. Okay. And here's a question for you, right? I want to pose a hypothetical.
Ask me, and then I want to give it back to Erudite.
Okay.
I was filling time until she got
so,
back. Go ahead.
So you wake up one morning, you walk downstairs, your wife and children have disappeared. You see a bunch of strangers sitting at your dining table, and they say to you, "We're your new children. We're your new family members. Don't worry. We share the same values as you." Are they your family members?
No.
Of course not. Yeah. So what I'm saying is,
but that conservatives
and nationalists. But conservatives and nationalists conceive of the nation as a family.
My countrymen are not also not my family, right? And there's a different relationship.
What I'm saying is, it's a personality shift.
You're trying to make an analogy that doesn't work, because what we consider family is much different, and the concept is different than of my neighbor. And the concept of a neighbor is different than the concept of a countryman or a fellow citizen, right? These are different concepts, and we cannot treat them the same. So yes, in your example, obviously, if I came downstairs and my my family was replaced by body doubles, right? Or different people who shared the same values, walk the time, talk the same. Yeah, they're obviously different people. But that doesn't work when we start doing this with citizenry, right? It just
I know, and I'm not saying it should be a one-to-one comparison. All I'm trying to point out here is that the way that conservative nationalists view the concept of a nation, it's literally a philosophical, personality-driven distinction. They conceive of the nation as a wider family, and that's why
this is why I think that they're fundamentally not American. They're not American, right? The American dream, if you're ransacking it to just stick white people in there, you are. Okay, let me explain, right? What is the American? What is America? You gotta let me know. Nope. My turn. Okay. What is America? My answer to that is it is a fundamental civic preponderance built on Greek philosophy, Roman bureaucracy, Christian theology, and Enlightenment epistemology. That is what makes America. Those are like the core principles of it. And so
if you swap them out, what happens?
Then the culture changes, but the color doesn't matter here.
I agree color doesn't matter, but I care about the culture changing. And I think if you swap out large amounts of the population, it does change the culture.
But the issue is that the question that I was asking is if you like, have you seen the new Alien Earth show?
No, I haven't.
Good show.
Okay. Do you know the idea of synths though from Alien and Predator? So you like take a human mind and you put it into a synthetic body.
An android.
Okay, I don't know, but you've explained.
You can imagine it, okay?
Yeah.
And maybe you answered this in a way that you didn't mean to. I was asking if you take all of the American minds right now and you dump them into a synthetic body that happens to be brown. To me, America stays the same and the values of America stay the same. Because I do not think there is anything ancestral other than habituation when it comes to civic values. And so I agree that if you have a bunch of people... Do you want to interrupt me?
To that, though.
Oh, you got to let her finish her point.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, just give her a little time.
I understand that your concern is that if you bring in 2 million people from Somalia, they're not going to suddenly care about Greek philosophy and Roman bureaucracy and Christian theology.
Yes.
And, you know, Enlightenment epistemology. I understand that that's the concern, right? And to that, I would actually say, I actually am not open borders. I don't believe in just opening the floodgates and just letting everybody run in necessarily, right? But I do believe that the reason everyone wants to come here and the reason why everyone who is in like USSR or any of the like countries that were blocked up by it wanted to flee, why they needed the wall in Berlin, is because our culture is awesome. It's really good. It's brought about some of the best things in all of human like development. And as a result of that, I think that it will win out with normal bouts of immigration. And I do not believe in a tying of white to the American dream. And I think it's bad propaganda to do so. Because all I think it does is it otherizes the people of color coming in because they feel fundamentally not American, because we've made Americanism tied to whiteness, which is not the point of Americanism. And B, it lets the people who are genuinely racist, that you probably don't want to be associated with, get their teeth into trying to insist that their color is tied to the American dream. And I don't think that it is. And I don't think that you think that it is.
Okay, I want to clarify. I don't think color should be associated with the American dream. As I tried to explain earlier, I think of African Americans as heritage Americans, and they are such a core part of American culture. As Erudite explained earlier, you know, for example, African American music and culture, like this is a huge part of American culture. You literally can't distinguish it. You can't separate out African American music and these types of things from the wider American culture. It is such a huge part of it. That's where I differ from the white ethno-state people or the actual out and out racists. I believe that African Americans are a heritage part of America. What I'm talking about is I don't think that if you just completely swap out populations and swap out demographics, that the country remains the exact same. I know that you've got this thought experiment that you propose where you could just theoretically, you know, like, I don't know, everything stays the exact same in America, but everybody's skin tone magically shifts a few points darker overnight. If you just magically happens. But I don't think... But this is the thing, though. I don't think culture is just this skin deep thing. It's also like populations, cultures, they build up over hundreds of years. They build up over literally generations and generations of building. And so for me, as I said earlier, it's not about skin color. It's like there is a population here that has been...
If you won't grant the synth thing, where essentially if I'm transplanting my brain, I'm assuming that all of the habituation, all of the socialization that I and my ancestors have had are also getting transplanted into a brown body. If you are still opposing my hypothetical, it is about brown. It is,
No,
right?
no. But the reason I oppose your hypothetical though is I just think it misunderstands human reality, because I don't think you can just swap people out. I don't think that the differences between people are
Of course,
just.
I mean, of course, you can't just swap people into
Because
a new body.
I
But
think
the
no, but I think
hypothetical is accounting for all of the things. If it's not biology, if it's not
this is
my melanin, I am swapping everything else over. I'm
okay.
swapping your
But
ancestry. I'm swapping who
yeah,
your
but this is my
parents
point.
are, how long they've been here. All that I'm changing is the level of melanation in your skin. And if
Okay,
that
but
is a problem, it fundamentally
okay,
is racially tied. And that's an issue.
okay, Erudite. I've got no problem with melanin, no problem whatsoever. I can understand your thought experiment where, like, everything remained the same but melanin changed, nothing would change. I get that. My point is this though: I don't think that human beings. I don't. I just think it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of human populations, nationhood, all these different things to just basically say that like what we're talking about is just melanin here. Because I'm not just talking about melanin. I'm talking about
Well,
people built up America
no,
over
I get
400
you.
plus years.
Well, let me ask you, we
You get
don't
what I
have to
mean?
deal
Like,
with the hypotheticals here. When Reagan gave amnesty to 3 million illegal immigrants in 1986, did we become less, or did the American culture, was that hurt at all by him doing that?
it's much smaller numbers. We're talking about probably 20, 30 million people went in under Biden, right? It was a huge amount. It's
I don't think
what's the
those
number
numbers
now?
are
It's like
accurate. It
it's
was not
about
20 to
10% of the
30
American
million
pop.
people.
No, sorry. The total number in America, I think, is about 20 to 30 million. I think illegal migrants, something like that. And there were about 10 million who came in, or 5 to 10 million who came in just under Biden. So it's huge numbers. Um, all I'm saying, right, is I don't think that. I think the reason why Erudite proposes this hypothetical about we're all the exact same, the only thing that differs between us is melanin. I think it's because fundamentally it's a different conception of human nature where I think
No,
Erudite believes that
I'm
if
just
everybody
testing
had
your
the exact
thinking. I
I
really
think
want to believe you
yeah
that it's not about melanin. So I'm trying to come up with the
yes
most good faith hypothetical where
yes
everything you value, you are claiming you value, is
yes
identical except for
yes
melanation, right?
yeah.
I'm saying
Look, I've got no
everything else is
problem
identical.
as I said to you, got no problem with melanation. I just think
Then
that it's
my
a silly
hypothetical is
story.
easy. Then my
But I'm
hypothetical is
saying that I
easy. We
think
can get into
I'm saying
habituation. I'm
it's a
willing to
silly
grant you
hypothetical.
habituation. It's
I'm
not a
just saying
silly
it.
hypothetical
I think
if
it's a
all
silly
I'm
hypothetical
trying
because
to. It's
I
only
think
silly
it
because you keep
misunderstands
failing
nation.
it, though. The silly part
No,
is
because
that
I'm
I
trying
am
to explain
trying
it to
to
you.
exclude melanin and get into what you actually think. Because to be
Okay,
frank,
but
this
what I'm trying to point out.
just hold on. Just let me.
Yeah.
I'm not being
Okay.
bad faith to you. I'm trying to understand
Okay.
you.
Okay.
If it's not melanin, which I'm trying to grant you that it's not because you keep saying
And
that
it's
it's not,
not.
then
I know.
my hypothetical is easy, right? So I'm like, okay, so if I just exclude this one factor, if I change this one factor, do you think America would stay the same? And the fact that you can't say yes is confusing because what you're
Okay.
describing is this ambiguous, hold on, breathe, this ambiguous ancestral thing that you're insisting is not biological in nature, but it's not clear what it exactly is, which is why I offered habituation, right? But it seems like habituation is maybe insufficient to describe that. So you're describing this extremely amorphous, vague concept of ancestral something that isn't biology. And so I'm trying to say, okay, well, if it isn't biology, then if I remove the biology factor and everything
Yeah.
else stays the same, then it should be an easy grant of like, yeah, of course, I think America would still be the same
Okay.
country if we all
Okay.
got dropped into a synth
Look.
body
Yeah.
and all that was different
Okay.
was the color of our skin or
Okay.
magic
If
happened.
we all dropped into different bodies, but everything else remained the same, our personalities, our ideology, our values, our way
Yeah.
of acting in the world,
Yes.
yes. But my point is this, though: I don't think that is a serious or a genuine. I don't think that's a sensible understanding of differences between human beings. Because I
That's
don't.
fine. But then what is the difference you're
And
trying to
I'll
delineate here?
I'll
Because
give you
I've
an
been
example,
asking
right?
you that. That's why I gave you the hypothetical.
No, just
Okay.
maybe I
Okay.
can bridge this gap because I think
Can I make a point? Can I make one point?
Go ahead.
Okay. There was recently an article in The Economist, and it said that African migrants to America in the modern era, in the past 20 years, according to all these different metrics, are actually doing extremely well. In some metrics, they are even doing better than white heritage Americans, okay? In terms of employment, in terms of monetary, it's because it's largely because it's self-selecting for like the most educated, highly skilled people coming to America, etc. Now, obviously, this shows us that we all agree there are unfortunately big struggles in the African American community with poverty, crime, inequality, all these things, right? They have the same melanin as these new modern migrants to America, but there are major differences in outcome. And part of this is because it's the legacy of slavery. It's the legacy of
There are
racism
cultural
and
differences
discrimination.
between immigrants and people who are in
That's my point.
urban communities.
That's exactly my point.
I don't disagree.
That's my exact point. That's my exact point. That's why
I don't understand how this is a point in your favor, though.
Okay, so because this is what I'm saying. I think what really distinguishes it is culture. It's not necessarily melanin. So yes, Erudite has this thought experiment where, yes, okay, everything changed the same, but right now suddenly all three of us are, I don't know, like black. But our exact personalities, everything is the exact
I'm
same.
black now. Okay. Yes.
Okay. But I just think like,
but go ahead.
I think it's not a serious thought experiment though, because at the end of the day though, if you do in real life, away from thought experiments, if you do mass demographic change and mass migration and stuff like that, it's not just fully swap. It's not like for like swaps. It's also, you're doing population change. And when you change population change, inevitably there's going to be cultural changes as well. Do you get my point?
Yes, if you completely change who's here in America.
Yes, that's my point. That's why I'm saying.
What does that have to do with ancestry? I don't understand that.
Because,
so if I just murdered, if I waved a wand and everyone who is alive now ceased to exist, they weren't genocided.
Yeah.
I don't know why you're turning away. I am using hypotheticals to understand your position because you're insisting that it's not biology, but it's some amorphous idea of ancestry. But I can't figure out what you mean by that.
Well, I'll explain. I think hundreds of years, generations, literally. Like, and I'll give you an example of that.
Do you mean
I'll give you an example.
Genetic neuroplastic transferences?
Let me get into it, right? Weird psychology, for example. Like, there's that book that argues, for example, that major changes in psychology occurred in Western Europe compared to other regions of the world as a result of a whole range of historically contingent factors. One of these big contingent factors was the fact that the Catholic Church rose to power in Western Europe and they banned cousin marriages. And over time, over like 1,000 years, this essentially made Western Europeans, Northwestern Europeans, far less clannish and far less focused on sort of kinship networks than, for example, a country like Pakistan, which for literally centuries now has a rate of cousin marriage that's like 60%. So what I'm saying is culture is something that people are not just blank slates. Culture does build up over hundreds of years. Do you get what I mean?
Maybe I don't know much about Pakistan. Is Pakistan particularly clannish?
Yes, extremely so. And that's arguably one of the major reasons why it's a really poor country and it does really bad on a whole range of metrics.
Okay, but my problem with this whole discussion
causing the issue, not the clannishness. Like,
look, I'm not trying to be mean.
No, I'm not being mean either.
The argument of the
no, hold on. Can I just go for a second?
Okay.
Please.
Yeah,
like,
sure,
come on.
Sure. Okay. Sorry.
The thing that you pointed to, the cousin fucking, I do know that that's higher in Pakistan, which would lead to worse genes, right? Because there's inbreeding that's happening.
I'm not making that claim necessarily, but
I know
I don't want to be mean. Yeah.
You're not being mean. I am confused. I am looking for a coherent through line. And so I'm offering you things like, are you talking about epigenetic neuroplasticity? I'm offering you habituation. I'm literally offering you options that are not genetics. And you're saying tribalism. And I'm like, okay, so is Pakistan more tribal? And you're like, yeah, because they cousin fuck all the time. So they're really poor. And it's like, no, they are inbred. That's the issue. I don't know if it's true that they're more tribal than like another country. Because of inbreeding. I think that they have recessive genes, which is causing issues in their society.
Okay, perhaps, look, I'm not going to necessarily say that everyone in Pakistan's inbred. I don't want to be mean or anything. I know lots of good, nice people from Pakistan. And educated, like top educated people in Pakistan are brilliant people. All I'm saying is, like, one of the arguments of this type of books, right, is there are parts of the world where kinship ties matter so much more. It's who your in-group is matters so much more than, for example, Anglo-individualistic types of societies, like, for example, America, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. The argument of that book, which is, let me grab it actually, I've got it right here. Like, the argument, for example, of this book is that over centuries, because of that historically contingent thing that the Catholic Church banned cousin marriage, it broke down the really clannish nature that you had in that type of society. And it, over time, over like 1,000 years, basically built up a society that placed in a much greater emphasis on individualism over tribalism. And if you actually look at all these different psychological studies, you see on so many different metrics, there's massive psychological differences between people in, say, Britain and Anglo-individualistic cultures and people in countries that don't have that, who come from more clannish, kinship-based cultures.
Yes, but that's
and so this is an
question.
example.
The question.
This is
on
an
all our
example, I
minds,
think, over. Yeah.
The question on all our minds is: do you believe that is the result of nature or nurture?
It's both. It's both.
It's both. What part of that is natural? As in, and what I mean by nature is it's in their genes.
Look. Genes respond to culture and the environment. So if Pakistan had theory, like, okay,
So you're taking
let's
we
do Erudite's
take a
experiment, right?
Pakistani kid from, like, he's 3. We import him to America. We give him to a American family to raise and to become a citizen and all that, right? Is he going to be
He will
less able
probably
to
end up
become
being
American
100
or more able or the same
No.
than anyone else?
No, I think because he was raised by American parents, he's probably going to end up being extremely assimilated.
Okay, so
So
the
it's just
nurture.
habituation. You're basically talking about societal habituation.
But my point is, though, Erudite, I think habituation, like, it's something that happens over generations, literally
That
centuries.
can't be true if I can take a Japanese kid, drop them in an American family, and you would agree that that child would be completely American. That cannot be true.
But what we're talking about here is individual cases versus the society overall.
You're jumping. The issue that you're doing in this conversation that's really, really confusing is that you're jumping from the individual to the group over and over. And I have granted you already. Nope, my turn.
Yeah.
1 second.
Okay.
I have granted you already in this conversation that yes, obviously, if you just bring in like 20 million Japanese people and just drop them into America, that America is going to probably look a lot more Japanese in the next 10 to 15 years and in its culture than it will look in the way that we view America, right? But that's a different conversation than what we've been talking about, which is the individual themselves, right? And trying to understand the process, because you are laying a lot of weight at the ancestry. And the issue is that ancestry cannot matter if you would grant me that as long as I take a single Japanese person and drop them into like a American family, that Japanese child will be American. The ancestry is obsolete there, other than the people's feeling of tied to the land because of like the long, but that's all just culture stuff that has nothing to do with actual ancestry. It doesn't change anything. I understand what you're talking about, the epigenetic triggers, which I get. I'm not denying epigenetic triggers from culture and society. What I'm saying, though, is that if the ancestry matters, then you shouldn't be able to take the Japanese child and drop them into America and just get a perfectly American person. You would get a slightly less American person. They would have some level of Japanese culture in them.
But I think if they were raised by American parents, they'd ultimately be fully American. But we're talking about individual cases versus things that happen at a collective, especially. And you know, my example, for example,
both individually. Do you understand why we have to not jump between the two, and why you jumping between the two is fallacious?
Remember my point, though, at the start of this thing where I was talking about my own example of assimilation in Australia. That example of where I basically grew up in a fully Australian suburb, went to a fully Australian school, everyone around me was Australian. It would be different if I had grown up in a school that was 99% Greek, everyone around me spoke Greek, everyone in my street spoke Greek. Then I probably would have seen myself as Greek. So what I'm saying is, if migration in low numbers, it's very easy to assimilate because people don't really necessarily segregate into ethnic enclaves and stuff like that. But when we're talking about mass level migration and people often just go into ethnic enclaves and stuff like that, that's where it becomes so much more difficult to assimilate. That's my whole point. So you give the example of the Japanese kid. You give the example of an individual Japanese kid raised by American parents. Yeah.
Can I respond now? Yeah, just to stay here. Okay.
Yeah.
I have already granted from the beginning that mass migration, unfettered mass migration, will culture changes. I've just granted you that.
Yeah.
The issue that I'm having in this conversation is that when you're talking about justifying I'm just going to call it the blood and soil argument, the ancestry argument, is you are moving in kind of an equivocative way. So you're loosely jumping between the individual factors that we care about and mass migration and conflating these two things together to try to make an ancestry argument. But the issue is that the mass migration issue is not the same conversation as the single individual. And you're lumping them in together to justify ancestry. But ancestry would only be relevant for the individual. In the mass migration, I've just granted you that. Yeah, that would be a really bad idea to just like bring in these things. Even though I've already said as well, it depends. I shouldn't even say it would just be really bad. It probably won't be bad up until a certain point, right? When we bring in like 4 million Italians in like 10 years, I think between the 1920s and 30s, right? It wasn't really bad for America, right? Even though there were these Italian enclaves because they did assimilate within 2 generations typically. So the mass migration, I could grant, will shift culture, especially like in places like New York and Boston, which had a lot of Italian immigrants, right? And at the same time, this can't be conflated with now talking about the individual and then using these two things together to justify ancestry, when the individual evidence is that the ancestry doesn't matter.
Just to, because I want to get this point out, because I think it bridges the conversation together and kind of makes it whole and helps everyone, not just the listeners, but I hope both Erudite and you understand what I'm trying to get at, right? In our conversation with Tali, Drew, you said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that people like Mehdi Hassan are less American somehow than the people he was talking to at the Jubilee. Am I getting that right? Am I?
No, let me clarify, right? Let me clarify.
Please.
What I got annoyed with was Mehdi Hassan was sort of making light of Charlie Kirk's assassination, etc. And I thought that was wrong in consideration of the fact that he has only really lived in America for like 10 years. And I think you should, I know that he's a citizen, but I still think just as a cultural thing, you should actually be respectful to people who have that ancestry and that family history going back.
How do you make like
because like 2-3 days after he said, okay, now that time has passed, let's go through
that
all the evil things that he did.
Months ago. That was way before.
I'm doing it. No, when we're talking about the.
Uh-oh.
Wasn't it? Like there's two different points here.
Go ahead.
Yes, I did talk about Mehdi Hassan with the Jubilee debate, but I'm pretty sure that when we were talking about it, it was right after the Charlie Kirk thing, was it not?
I believe it. We had the discussion about it after the Charlie Kirk thing, but the Jubilee debate was before the Kirk thing.
Yes, I know. So I did say that what I found objectionable was he was sitting at a table with a guy, and I didn't agree with that guy's views. He was far right. I don't agree with it. But he was telling this guy who had 400 years history in the country that he's just as American as him. And Mehdi only arrived 10 years ago. I think the fact that he literally arrived 10 years ago, like when he was in his middle age.
I'm more American than most Americans. My parents, my mom's side, immigrated to Canada from America. So am I technically more American than most Americans?
You're more American than Mehdi Hassan. You're more American than Mehdi Hassan.
This is the problem I have with this whole
America.
Sorry.
This is not America. Look, I don't know, the 14th Amendment. This is what the 14th Amendment says, right? The American belief is that all persons are born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. The idea that somebody who's been here for longer is more American is not at all
Mehdi
true.
Hassan. Let me go into Mehdi Hassan.
That would suggest that I am more American probably than Charlie Kirk's family, because my family came to the United States with like some of the first waves of pioneers and then moved to Canada later. No, I'm not more American than Charlie Kirk. I'm not American. I'm Canadian.
You're pretty culturally American.
I'm literally not American.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If you wanted to become an American, I'd allow it, right? But no, she's not American. Mehdi Hassan is literally more American than Erudite.
Let me say this. I think America, Britain, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand are essentially all brother countries. And it's pretty interchangeable. Like, especially the fact that Erudite's family...
We fought a war against Britain. We killed them until they left.
I know, but dude, it's been hundreds of years. The first settlers were all British. The culture is descended ultimately from that. So I think ultimately we are actually all like basically brother countries.
We celebrate a
Mehdi
day
Hasan-
from when we killed a bunch of Britain people, right? Like we celebrate a whole day
Okay.
about that, right? We have that as a holiday. I don't know if we're brother countries, but go ahead. You know what?
Yeah, it's
you know what?
it's
I won't
pretty
die on
obvious.
this hill.
I mean,
Go for it. Right?
okay. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, what culture is America similar to? Is America more culturally similar to Britain or Somalia? Obviously, Britain. So it's
Sure.
pretty obvious. Yeah, I think
No.
to anyone.
Like I said, I won't die on this hill. Go ahead.
With Mehdi Hasan, the problem with Mehdi Hasan is he was literally 30 and he was giving sermons in London when he was older than me.
Hold
He was
on. Are
late
you
20s,
more
almost
American than
30s old.
Mehdi?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm obviously
Okay.
not an American citizen, but I think I am culturally more American,
Am
basically.
I more American than Mehdi?
Yes, you are.
No.
You unironically are, Erudite.
I'm
So,
literally not.
Mehdi-
I'm not American.
Hold
Okay,
on.
Mehdi Hasan.
Well, how? Can you explain that? Like, I'm just really curious.
Like Mehdi
How is
Hassan is
Erudite?
an Islamist, and I don't think Islam. I'll literally explain. Right, Mehdi Hasan is an Islamist, and I don't think Islamism is compatible with being American culture. So, like Mehdi Hasan, for example, when he was literally 30 years old, when he's older than me, I am right now, was giving sermons in London saying that any non-Muslim was cattle, was kafir, that kafirs were cattle. That's his view of non-Muslims. Do you think that's? And then 5 years later, literally 5 years later, he moved to America in
Apologize for
2015.
that in 2019.
He apologized like 10 years after when he got caught.
First of all, the fact that he apologized at all puts him already leagues above the way most people talk about people. Imagine Trump
I
apologizing
doubt it.
for any
No,
of the dehumanization. Has
Dude,
Trump ever
I don't-
apologized for the dehumanization of all the people that he dehumanized?
Mehdi Hasan feels more affinity with other Muslims than he does with other Americans. That is a fact.
I can't speak for Mehdi Hassan. I imagine that he does feel quite strong affinity to Muslims. But the issue is that, do you think that most Black people feel more affinity with other Black people or just broad Americans?
I think African Americans, as I said, are heritage Americans because they've been in the country for 400 plus years. So I think
that's not what she asked.
Yeah, but that's not what I asked, right? Do you think
Yeah,
that they would
they
identify
might-
more
they-
as Black or
they
as
would
American?
maybe they'd identify more as African American, but African American is its own cultural thing, and it's been in the country for 400 years, so it's very distinct.
But the reason that Mehdi might feel closer to Muslims than broad Americans is typically about being a minority group, right? It's not about like not being American. Because if you ask him, is he more American than where's his family from? Is he Iranian? Where's his like ethnic background?
He's Indian Shia Muslim.
Okay, do you think that he would feel more American or more Indian?
I don't know. I actually don't know.
Probably more American because he has citizenry here, right? He's a naturalized citizen. I believe. I'm not keeping up on his.
He's a naturalized citizen. Yeah, he naturalized. I think he naturalized in like 2020 or something like that. 2023.
Sure, I don't keep up on his citizenry necessarily.
He just like my point is he just does not have the same cultural heritage, and Erudite has a much stronger cultural heritage to America than Mehdi Hasan. That's true.
I'm just not American. And this is
okay,
like
but
but
like the fact that your family had like hundreds of years of history in America though, whereas Mehdi literally arrived 10 years ago. Like you obviously do have more.
Doesn't matter for
connection.
America. It doesn't matter for America because America is built on the principle of naturalized and born citizens. Like the founding fathers' big thing, a really big thing to them, was the rejection of this like British casty type system that was very blood and soil. It was the opposite of that point. That's why it was so populist, right? That's why the populism within the Constitution was so big, is because it's this idea that what makes us America and what makes us American is the values that we hold. Which is
I just don't think that Mehdi Hasan doesn't share those values, and he pretends to be progressive.
Absolutely does. Look at the way that he
which
responds.
Which value does he not share?
The issue is that
I don't trust him. I don't trust him.
That's fine that you don't trust him, but your assumption on this has to assume mind-reading malice that isn't necessarily there. Look at the way. I'm not done. Look at the way that he responded to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was really obscene in the way that he talked about Mehdi Hasan. Charlie Kirk was, some might argue, dehumanizing. I actually think everyone is allowed to be mean to each other. Mehdi Hasan said, Charlie Kirk asked for me to be deported, and it said something, I can't remember the exact quote, and said, and it was wrong for him to be assassinated. I'll wait.
Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. My headphones ran out of charge and I can't hear anything now. Sorry, I don't know what to do because my other headphones weren't working. Fuck.
Okay.
Okay, I might have to change laptops. Is that okay? Sorry, guys.
I don't know if you can't even hear if we say it's okay.
I can't hear anything. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
okay.
give it. We'll give you a minute. We'll give you a minute. Go do what you need to do. He can't hear us.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I gotta try fix.
How you feeling so far, Erudite?
Fine.
Yeah.
It's all good in the hood. All right. Question though. In the Tally convo with him, why was she carrying so much water for him? Why was she doing that?
You're gonna have to ask Tally. I think Tally likes Drew because Drew is pro-Israel. If I had to guess, but I don't know.
Bro, does Tally is open that she's like a vibes first person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought so.
I don't know, like this whole idea of heritage Americanism is very I'm going to sound very SJW here. It's offensive to me. I am offended by the concept. Being someone who is a proud American and espouses American values, the concept that because my parents, my dad's dad happened to be in the country longer than someone who came here in the 60s, right? Whose family came in the 60s, then maybe second generation, that I am somehow more American in any realistic way than they are is fundamentally an alien, and I would argue an un-American concept. I would take someone who was naturalized yesterday, but who supports the Constitution, who believes in freedom of speech, who believes in all these things. I would take them in a heartbeat and say they're far more American than some spoiled rich kid whose family's been in America for 100 years, and who thinks America bad. Like, I think that the naturalized is way more.
For any country that's like built on the back of like actual, like legitimately colonization of native lands. Like, it's just like, well,
okay.
About that one.
Can you hear us, Drew? Oh.
Sorry, guys. Bit of a disaster.
Might not work.
Testing. Can I leave the call for 1 second and just test it and then come back?
Go. Leave the call. I'll bring you back in. In the meantime, super chats.
Yeah.
I'll read.
Super chats. Also saying I'm more American as a Canadian than Mediasan. Crazy.
Wow. Okay.
Bad.
Well,
take.
I'm just gonna go through these real quick. Greg Yo for $5 asked Drew about Drew's interview with Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, and Michelle Williams. I'm gonna have to do that when he gets back. I didn't know he interviewed with Beyonce.
I don't know if I believe that's true.
Oh.
I'm dubious.
$10 from the Trib one to say for Drew. I'll skip the Drew ones, but we'll get to him when he gets here. $50 from Grassroots Hegemon. It is a moral imperative to get Canadians out of American politics, and I say that as someone who thinks our politics sucks dick from the back. I don't know. I don't mind. I opine.
Sorry, when you're the world power, everyone cares about your politics. Yeah. Get over it.
I will opine on other countries' politics. They're allowed to opine on ours. 20 WhickTV gift memberships from Grassroots Hegemon. Thank you. $5 from Gelatinous Rube. Erudite's gaslighting will usher in the new American century of leftism by driving anyone who isn't retarded from the last century of race communism.
Okay, Snowflake. Fucking use your mom's psych words more. Fucking pathetic behavior.
$100 from Grassroots Hegemon. Can I get a wrench? The cyan blue really brings out my eyes. No. We still love you though, Grassroots. $2 from Jordan Rogers to say not black people, Kyla, but people with 14 priors when we talk about executions and death penalty.
Sure. What I'm talking about is schizophrenia. Yeah, unfortunately, the death penalty doesn't cure schizophrenia. Prison doesn't cure schizophrenia.
Oh.
Just cures being alive.
Okay, you back? Can you hear us?
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. That was very unfortunate.
We got a couple super chats for you to kind of get us back in the mood.
Okay.
$5 from Grego to ask about Drew's interview with Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, and Michelle Williams. Did you interview those people?
I did not interview Beyonce. That would have been very good if I did. I have not actually interviewed Beyonce, but thank you guys.
Okay. $10.
I don't know. I don't even know where that comes from.
Me neither. $10 from the Trib to ask for Drew. What is the threshold for assimilation generation-wise? Or is it certain groups can't come in?
I think.
Let me finish the whole question that he wrote.
I've got an answer.
Yeah.
I've got an answer.
Also, what is the cultural worth keeping that can't add the positive ideals from other cultures?
Okay. One, I think the marker of assimilation is whether your first loyalty is to your new country, your fellow citizens, regardless of religion or creed. If you'd be willing to die for America and your loyalty is to other Americans other than to another religion or something like that, I think you've assimilated. And regarding taking positive aspects from other cultures, I like that. Let's have banh mi shops. Let's have taco trucks. That's good. I just don't like Islamic beheadings and stuff like that. Okay, like I think that's pretty reasonable.
I think I will agree with you. Beheadings are bad. $2 from Kick Stanza to say if Obama tweeted at Drew, he'd go back to liberal.
No,
that does seem to hold on. Like that does seem to be the general opinion. I guess is that you take the side of whoever's nicest to you last.
I do like people being nice to me, but all shit posting aside, like I've just explained for 3 hours how I have pretty divergent personality and so I don't think it's as simple as just
$5. $5 Australian dollars, and we will take your multicultural money here. Okay, Cameron Ezzy. Drew swapped sides because he didn't want to end up in a camp. He's a coward, rage baiting, nothing more. As an Australian, he's not one of us. Okay. $5.
Yeah. Real Australian is when you're being a gay race communist. Yeah, that's what real Australians are all about.
Yeah. $5.
I love this. There's this trend in Australia where like leftists pretend to be patriotic and they're like, oh, the real Australians hate America and hate Western civilization, and if you like Western civilization, you're a traitor to Australia. It's like, yeah, dude, being Australian is just literally being a gay race communist. That's exactly what it is.
Okay, we don't want to give $50 responses to $5 questions or comments. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, $5 for Trib 1 to say, Drew, saying it's personal over and over. Drew doesn't mean you get a pass, LOL. It doesn't mean it's okay that you're being unfair to one side. Thank you for the $5.
But I also explained pretty at length different political and philosophical views that I have. It's not just personal, but whatever.
$5 from Trib 1. For all, including you, Wick, what do you all think MAGA meant or was alluding to back in 2016? And is it alluding to the same thing today or no? This is in regard to your Flight 93 comment.
I think the core thing is that I think the core thing that motivates Trumpism and right-wing populism across the entire West is concern about mass cultural displacement and mass demographic displacement.
Okay,
as a result of mass immigration.
I think that might be a big part of it, but I think that what MAGA was alluding to then was more of a this worry about the deep state, like siphoning power and making sure that all the elections always go their way. I think is more of that, but I could be wrong. I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that, Erudite?
No.
Okay. $5 from the Trib to say Drew doesn't realize that he's essentializing. Well, it seems that way. How do you suss out if culture is going to be thwarted or assumed by different races? Oh. 10 gift memberships from Trib. Thank you. $5. What percentage of immigrants going to America didn't want to go to America? Or is it they want to go to America to take over?
I don't know. I don't know that exact answer, dude. But there are certainly a lot of people who move to the West, not necessarily because they like Western values and culture. It's just because they can make more money living in the West. So that's an important part to it. It can't just be about, I want to move to the West because I'll have a better standard of life. You actually have to believe in the same values. You have to believe in the same culture, and you have to like the culture. That's, I think, an important part.
$10 from Psychonaut. The massive gap in Drew's logic is that cultures change over time. At one time, the culture that he is touting right now was influenced and changed into what it is now.
Yes, I agree with him on that. Of course. I don't believe that cultures are static. What I'm against is just changing the culture rapidly in negative ways as a result of mass migration. That's what I'm against.
That's fine. It just has nothing to do with the ancestry argument, right? which is the only point I'm trying to make to you. I think it is fine to have the classic conservative philosophy opposed to mass migration as a result of population displacement. The issue is that that is nothing like, I guess, like, I don't know if you care about this, but when you do the ancestry argument and you conflate it with this, it gets very confusing. It feels very race realistic. And I think I've done my utmost. I have done my utmost to clarify what it actually is. You keep saying it's not race, and I will grant you that. But that just makes it this amorphous nothing. Because most conservatives can agree to the depopulation. In fact, lots of liberals do too. But you're also making an ancestry claim. That's where people run into issues.
I don't think ancestry is the number one thing or the only one thing. I think it's just part of a broader conversation about nationhood. And I do think that if your family's been part of a country for hundreds of years, then you do have a very deep stake in that country. And I think anyone with a relatively fair mind would see that. I think it's true.
I think people who struggle really hard to immigrate here and oftentimes spend thousands of dollars to immigrate here also probably have a really big stake in your country, right?
But it depends. But it depends, Erudite, whether they're doing it because they like the values of the country or they're doing it just for economic reasons. That is also another part of it. Also, Mehdi Hassan,
what's the difference between the values and the economic reasons? If the values didn't create the economic reasons, what are we even talking about?
What do you mean? Like there are people who want to move to America because they will earn significantly more living in America, but they don't necessarily like American culture. There's a lot of cases like that.
The issue is that how likely is it that these people just stay hating America but keep loving all of the American culture that made their job, that pays them so well possible?
That's the problem. That's the big problem. But that's the problem. People do that.
It's not the big problem. That's
a lot of people. A lot of people bite the hand that feeds them.
I imagine that this is the generational thing, right? I imagine there are a lot of people. Probably not most, but there's probably a decent number that come over exclusively for economic benefits. And the problem is that it's really hard to separate the economic benefits from the culture because it's the culture.
I agree with you.
In large part, the American project that made the economic benefits, which is why their children tend to love America a lot more if the parents don't already and tend to become more American over time.
But there is also the equal problem as well, Erudite, where you also see this as well, and you'd have to agree that this is a phenomenon that exists. There's also second generation types who like there's equal phenomenon where they'll be the first. They understand they lived in the home country. They understand that the new country is so much better than the home country. They genuinely are really patriotic and love the country, and they're very humble and thankful for the fact of being able to migrate. And then, unfortunately, then you sometimes do get this situation where you get second generation, the kids of those people who will struggle with identity complexes and stuff like that. And then they then adopt that sort of like far left decolonial shit and stuff like that. And without realizing
well, hold on. You're making this sound like a pipeline. Like the second generational people who struggle with identity.
It's not always. It's not always.
Two cultures. Well, this is very common that they straddle two cultures. But to act like that's a pipeline to being far left is just
it's not a pipeline. It's not a pipeline. It is. All I'm saying is it's a phenomenon that does. Unfortunately, a sad phenomenon. It's a bad phenomenon.
When it happens, the issue is, I guess, first of all, how many economic migrants do you think are coming here and they hate America? They hate what America is.
I don't know necessarily, but there are some people. It's probably less that they hate. It's probably less than they hate America. It's potentially more the fact that they might be culturally ambivalent to the country. They're more just interested in the economic thing.
They're probably also conservative and hate gay people and trans people. That's probably the main thing that they don't like, right?
There's a lot of them like that.
Women are whores.
That's true. There are heaps of people like that. There are a lot of people.
If there's any economic migrant who doesn't actually like American culture but comes here for economic opportunity, 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to be way more socially conservative anyways.
Yes.
Which would be conserving, which is conserving probably the parts of American culture that you like the most.
But this is different though. This is the difference. I like the fact that America and Anglo cultures are actually less cleanish and more open. I like the fact that there are gay rights and stuff like that in the West. I don't necessarily like drag queen story time. I think some of it gets a bit cringe and stuff like that. But I don't necessarily want gay people to be thrown off buildings as happens unfortunately in some parts of the Middle East. So I don't necessarily want that cultural change either. I want gay people to be protected. I don't want them to be bashed up by Islamic extremists, etc.
I didn't say that you do. The issue is that this culture that you're so afraid of being thrown away is okay, the only part of the culture that seems at risk of potentially being thrown away, which is very unlikely, would be freedom of association. And in this regard, you're way more critical of the left on all these things than the right that is actively pressuring freedom of association.
I think.
So if that's your principle, why aren't you sticking to it?
culture is not just somebody's political views as well, though. Yes, like somebody who's an Islamic extremist probably agrees with cultural conservative on gay people and stuff like that, but on every other aspect of culture, they're completely different, and so they're not going to have any alignment in the end anyway.
Not necessarily. Like, yeah, okay, the average like radical jihadist, first of all, probably isn't immigrating legally to the country most of the time, right? And if they are, they're probably not staying in the country. I would assume. I would assume that if you're a radical Muslim, you're probably going to go back to like Tehran. Why would you stay here?
Maybe some people stay and try to change the culture and try to change the culture that's around them. Unfortunately, some people just go to enclaves. Like if you're a radical, you can go to an enclave of other radicals and just be around that enclave all the time.
Yeah, but the issue is that power so mighty that it's usurping all of the greater American culture, and also is it so powerful that your kids aren't getting usurped into that greater culture, which it seems like
It
their
happens.
kids definitely
It does. It does happen. Like, I'll give you an example. There's
but it happening isn't the point.
Is Mehdi Hassan
that
doing this?
I don't know necessarily. I don't think
is
Mehdi
Ilhan Omar doing this?
I don't know.
Can you give us a name of someone you think is doing this?
Trying to
they've
Islamic
infiltrated
extremists.
America. They've immigrated to America for the specific purpose of changing the culture to be more Islamic. Can you give us a name?
Sure. I mean, there was, if you go to Memory TV, you can see like hate imams in Dearborn who praise Hezbollah. Do you think these guys like love American culture if they're praising Hezbollah in a Dearborn mosque?
I don't know. I know a lot of heritage Americans who love Hezbollah, who are the whitest motherfuckers you know. So I'm going to ask you again. I'm going to
it's obviously a little bit different.
My question a little more targeted.
It's a little bit different if you are a Muslim who's advocating Hezbollah.
Drew, let me ask my question. Can you give me a person, individual who has infiltrated, you believe, has infiltrated America and isn't just has a foreign policy take that you find cringe, but is actively trying to change American culture to be more Islamic?
Yes. Dearborn, like just type in Dearborn on Memory TV, and then there's all these translations of Islamic extremist rhetoric in Dearborn. Dearborn, Michigan, Islamic scholar Usama Abdul Ghani. Israel is weaker than ever. We must finish the mission. Can things ever go back in the way they were before October 7? Israel is a goat being slaughtered. US doubling down on protests is a sign of US internal weakness. Dearborn mayor at rally in support of Nasrallah, Hezbollah.
Okay, these are foreign policy positions you disagree with. These are not American
here's a good one. Dearborn Mayor Hamoud, we want people across the globe to have the values we advocate for in Dearborn. Community leader Osama Siblani, we will take you back to Poland. We are Americans and America is changing. Our martyrs are heroes. Our leaders are great. Chief among them is Nasrallah. Raise your flags high. Greetings to the resistance from Dearborn. Do you think that guy loves America? Of course not, dude. He's trying to change the culture. That's a concrete example right here.
So I actually wanted to point to, so my question for you was if you're grifting, like if you've radically changed something for like some purpose. So here's the thing that I find confusing about you. July 31st this year, you were responding to Aunt Middleton and you said, they were basically saying anybody who's third generation immigrant shouldn't be able to hold any positions in government, which was a fucking insane position. So you
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
I know.
Yeah.
And you say, this is stupid. There are plenty of decent, patriotic, anti-communist, anti-Islamist migrants.
I agree with that. Yes, I do fully agree with that. Of course, I still agree with that. I haven't.
A few days ago,
I don't think anything I've said. I don't think anything I've said in this debate contradicts what I just said on July 31st.
Sure.
Or anything I've said in this debate at all.
October 4th, you said these Muslim MPs are in the top 1% of assimilated migrants to the United Kingdom because they had enough social capital to run for parliament. They're calling for UK to declare a war on Israel. Integration isn't working. Islamists don't want to.
In the UK, it's not working. Yes, in the UK, it's not working, and Islamic extremists are not.
Lots of migrants are decent, patriotic people.
I still think that there are still lots of good ones.
You were saying that this is the most assimilated migrants you can get, and even they aren't good enough.
Well, I do think.
How are these?
Well, as I said, Britain is in a much worse position than America and Australia in terms of Islamic extremism. I think we all have to agree it is a massive doom appeal that the fact that like the reality is they are one of the most assimilated Muslim migrants in the UK. They have enough cultural capital to run for parliament and actually win. and yet they're calling for UK to invade Israel. So, like, is that an example of assimilation happening? It's clearly not happening in that case, is it? And it doesn't contradict the fact that I still think that there are some really good patriotic anti-Islamist, anti-communist migrants, but those particular guys are Islamists.
The question
correct?
is to find the positions that were migrants. I just had to go back to July, and around July 31st or before, most of your posts, when I look up the word migrants, are actually very pro-migrants, defending them.
Reality is I was really critical even then.
I'm looking through. You were very critical starting in August, is when everything shifted.
Earlier, dude. Earlier. I was against
your messages
I was against
for a long time.
I didn't look through his tweets. I don't know. I can't weigh in on this.
I've been calling for substantial amounts. I've been calling for substantial decreases to immigration since at least January. I was talking about the UK grooming gang scandal in January. I've been calling for Islamic extremists to be deported from at least middle of last year. So it's like the fact that I also have a tweet where I said there are some good patriotic migrants who are anti-communist and anti-Islamist.
What's your, and I know this is a little aside, so forgive me, Erudite. What's your position on Reform UK? Are you a fan?
I support them. At this point, I support them.
Do you want to debate Loaderbox on this?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, I'll set it up. I'll get you the time because we were trying to get Sargon.
So I went through all of your tweets that have the word migrants in it. Anything from around July is pro-migrants. We hit August.
Let me get my phone. No, I'm going to find.
I will find just for a second. I'm on your page right now. I'm looking. When we hit August, the tone dramatically shifts, at least with the word migrants. It's possible you have other tweets, but when I'm looking at migrants, when I also looked up the word Trump, around August, you start warming up to Trump. By September,
I did say that
you're still critical of Trump, but you're much warmer to Trump. Pre-July, very, very critical of Trump.
Well,
can't find almost any positive posts about him.
I have to admit that I did have a massive shift in my worldview in July. Like, a big part of it was being personal victim of crime and having all these leftists cheer on the crime that happened to me. And it's not just that as well.
I guess, explain to me, how is it possible if you have principled political positions that you can go from being that critical of Trump to not that critical? You still criticize him a little bit, but definitely not like you did before. What is
because I've told you I've told you that the main thing that has changed in my worldview is I've become much more critical of multiculturalism, mass migration, the cultural impacts of that. That's the main thing that's changed. And I started to come around to the idea that obviously I don't agree with all of Trump's methods, and I think he's often called
never sure
borders and deport illegal immigrants. Yes, I do agree with that.
You're literally you're advocating for Trump to bomb Venezuela if they don't have democratic elections.
Yeah, I do. No, well, I would. To be fair, I would have agreed with that a year ago. I would have agreed with that a year ago.
It seems like you're vehemently anti-war, and you criticize Trump over war, rightfully, in like July.
Type in Venezuela in my tweets. You could go back years. I've been against the Venezuelan regime since like 2019.
Sure.
And I've always been an interventionist. I've always been an interventionist. I've always been a massive interventionist.
Pause. I think you're missing my point. Right?
Yeah.
It seems very sus to me that, particularly after the Kirk stuff, suddenly you have a lot less negative to say about Trump, whereas before you did. And this is the thing. If you want me to believe that you're principled in your political positions, that it's not just feelings, I have had crimes done to me before. I've had people be nasty to me about crimes. I had a fucking miscarriage recently because of leftists canceling me, and mostly they've celebrated it and come into my Discord to mock me.
How can you still be a leftist then? I don't understand.
Because I'm principled. Because I believe in what I believe, and nobody gets to rob me of it, particularly people trying to victimize me. Nobody gets to steal that from me. I believe fundamentally in my value system because I fucking earned it. Because I've worked tirelessly, because it is hard to believe in it, and I still do. That's why. Because my in-group being mean to me will never be an excuse for me to betray my principles. I am Christian because I believe in it. Not because I think Christians are nice, or because they aren't fucking awful to me all the time. It's because nobody robs me of my principles. They're mine.
Okay, I'll try to explain my position. From 2019 onwards, I first got involved in political activism because I was a campaigner against the Chinese Communist Party, and I involved myself with the Hong Kong protests. From 2019 onwards, that's when I first got involved with protesting and politics. From that moment onwards, I was dealing with death threats from tankies for 6+ years. I was swatted. Okay, I was swatted. So they created a fake bomb threat in my name. I got arrested in the UK on fake terror charges. I was in a prison cell for 23 hours incommunicado. I was stranded in the UK for 6 months. I was swatted by a tankie probably, and they all celebrated online. I have had 6 years of death threats from them. I've had swatting attacks. My brother lives in New York City. They did a SWAT attack against my brother with a fake bomb threat against him at LAX airport. FBI agents went to my brother at his college dorm in New York City to question him because they swatted my brother. They swatted my mother. They basically did, they put a bounty on my head. In 2023, the Australian Federal Police actually informed me that they actually had to make raids in Australia against people who were plotting to find my address and violently harm me. And they heavily hinted that this was basically a Chinese foreign interference plot. And essentially, all the people who celebrated me being killed all these times for years and years and years were tankies, far left people. And then I see Charlie Kirk, he gets murdered. All these people that I thought were my friends celebrated. I see October 7, I see mass butchery, people being raped and slaughtered and beheaded. And I see all my leftist friends celebrate it and say, this is decolonization and we want this for Australia. At what point, they've already been saying that they want to kill me for 5 to 6+ years. At what point does my own sense of self-preservation have to kick in? And I have to say, I don't want to march next to, I don't want to be part of the same political movement that brings these people in, and I don't want to march next to them at rallies, people who want me dead because of my views, people who want my mother dead because of her views, people who want my loved ones dead because of one of my views. My view is this: I love Western civilization, I love my country, I love my family, I have these conservative values, and I don't want to ally myself with people who want me dead because of these values. And I think that's very fair.
I think that is fair.
And unfortunately, I see this thing, unfortunately, where like you're basically trying to say, oh, Drew, you've grifted because you've changed your political principles as a result of these things happening to you. You should have kept them. But here's the thing, Erudite. I think it would have been suicidal for me to still say that I'm a leftist and march next to leftists who want me dead, who spent 6 years telling me they want me dead. Charlie Kirk happens, and October 7 happens, and all these things, and I'm a victim of crime, and every single time this happens, they celebrate the worst stuff happening to me and my family. They want me dead. They're so obvious about it. They openly boast that they want to destroy America. They want to destroy Western civilization. They want to burn our countries to the ground. Why would I agree with them? Why would I still believe that I'm a leftist at this point? See, actually, it's not grifting for me. It's a genuine, passionate thing.
So the issue is you can be really passionate about something and not have a principled shift, right? That's the concern.
But his principles, because my core thing is I love Western civilization. I think even from 2019.
Just pause. I'm not saying, so all of the things that you've experienced, first of all, I'm really sorry. That's horrific. All of those things are wrong. People should not be swatting you over your political positions. You should not be killed for your political positions. Genuinely, I'm sorry. And I'm sure you won't be surprised for me to say, I hate those people too. And I think it's really bad that we've been shaking hands with them. But fundamentally, I'm left because I believe in it, right? And if you aren't left, if you don't believe... I lost belief in it. Well, because of your principles, because of what you actually believe in, right? Not because of how nasty people have been to you, right? I think about how the church... I
concluded that I was too naive about human nature. That's it. I concluded that I was too naive about human nature and the prospect that we could have this perfect society if we just all come together and create this. It's literally my view of human nature changed. When I was a progressive, I thought that human beings were perfectible. I thought human beings were innately good. Now I don't think that human beings are innately good. I've seen war. I went to the front lines in Ukraine. I saw the aftermath of atrocities. I don't think human beings are innately good. My whole perspective is I want to try and stop civilization from collapsing, because I think human beings, if they're let off the leash, will literally just murder and slaughter each other.
If that's true, if what you care most about is that basically saying, I think people are not good. You didn't say evil, but they're not fundamentally good, at least, which I agree. I actually don't think people are fundamentally good. I think people are fundamentally people. I think they're extremely neutral, right? I agree with you on that one. And I have felt that way for a very, very long time, right? What I would say to you is that if you were concerned about civilization getting thrown off the rails, you want to push back against tankies and socialists? I'm right there with you. That's totally fine. And just to be clear, you don't have to be lockstep with me, ever. I would never ask for that. But if the principled value is there is evil in this world, and we have to take it seriously, then you have to take it seriously from everywhere, not just the side that offended you.
I don't think it's not necessarily that it's just this side offend me. It's that I genuinely believe, Erudite, that people like Hassan Piker and stuff like that, if they had full power, would kill me, and they would try and destroy
People
everything.
on the right, when they find out that my brother is gay, so the reason why I stopped being fundamentalist is the way that they treated my brother initially. That pushed me away, and then I rethought my entire faith, which most people would have just left their faith, which is power to them. I have maintained my faith. I'm just not a fundamentalist whatsoever in my Christianity at all. I'm a radical Orthodox Protestant, which we don't need to get into that. But most people from the right, when I still talk about it, don't think he should be even allowed to get married. They don't want to grant him any civic rights beyond like being able to work and staying closeted. Most people on the right want to doom my brother to a misery and suicide. That's what they want for him, fundamentally, because they want to take away his ability to live anything other than a closeted life, right? And so when we're talking about evil, we do have tangies that want to throw people in the gulag, but we also have a growing amount of groypers who are getting in the ear of increasingly powerful people who want to take away free speech and want to take away women's right to vote. Genuinely want to take away women's right to vote. And we could both say that's probably pretty far from here. But right now, the Supreme Court is trying to decide if gay people have a right to get married. What happens when they get rid of that? If they get rid of that, right? And so when we're talking about evil, I'm all on board with you for talking about the evils on the left because it is there. But we have to get really serious about the evils everywhere. And so when I'm saying it, you can't just focus on the side that offends you. What I'm saying is that I understand why you feel betrayed by your tribe. I really do. I really empathize with that, and I empathize with the rage. You're in the unfortunate position is that when I had to learn these lessons, particularly around Christians, was my learning lesson over this, I didn't have a platform. So I could do all my rage posting and trolling in small groups, and it didn't really affect anyone, and I was just a grumpy little girl when I was around Christians, and I was an asshole to Christians, and I was always criticizing them endlessly and not giving them any merit where they deserved, but I didn't have a platform. You're in a tricky position where you've been hurt by a side that you viewed as your tribe, that you poured into, you cared about, and you have a platform, which is not a covetous position to be in. And I'm not saying that I want your position. What I am saying is that I think we need principled speakers. I think we need principled political pundits because there are so few of them. And it would be a shame to me to see us lose another one because lefties are assholes. They are assholes, just to be very clear. But what you believe in principally should be driven on that.
Look, here's the thing. Okay, fair enough, Erudite, and fair enough. But look, let me make it clear. Like when I say that I believe that I'm a philosophical conservative now, my stance on all different manner of things has not changed. Like I still am very tolerant to gay people. I still support like universal public healthcare, all these different things, right? What I've changed is it's like a cultural attitude. It's like I think this is the core dividing line now. I think the core dividing line is basically like, do you like Western civilization? Do you like or do you want it to be burned down to the ground? Like and I see so many people on the far left who literally just want to burn it all to the ground. It's like the 60s.
I see people on the far right that do. They just mask it in American flags, right? But like look at the rallies between Trump and Kamala. Rallies, what did they have? What were their flags? They were like, we love America. We're American, right?
Okay,
it was all about
here's
that.
my problem, right? I know
what
that
was
the
Trump's?
mainstream... Okay, but here's the thing,
something
right?
about Biden.
Here's the problem. Like I fully agree with you and accept that like the mainstream Democrats, like they still talk about patriotism and all that sort of stuff. But I just think it rings hollow when they're also willing to basically ally with somebody like Zoran Mamdani, who I think fundamentally very deep down does not like America.
Hold on, just
he
real
has,
quick.
Like years and years and
there's
years
a lot of
posts
mainstream.
saying that
Just real quick, there's a lot of mainstream Democratic politicians who the left are attacking because they refuse to break bread with Zoran Mamdani. They don't endorse him. They have refused to endorse him. Who was it? Hakeem Jeffries, I think. Maybe I'm getting the name wrong. I don't want to spread misinformation, so I won't name specific names.
I think you're right about Hakeem Jeffries, but a lot of them have.
Old guard
There's
Democrats
a
were not
lot
on board with
of
Mamdani.
the Democrats who are currently in positions of power who are not breaking pet Rizwan Mamdani. So when you have this view of reality that just does not comport with the facts at hand, it makes me question like the decisions you're making.
Here's the thing.
You're right. Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
You are absolutely correct. There are portions of the left who are dangerous. It's not just mean; they are actively dangerous, and we need to not just distance ourselves, but excise them for the movement. I count Hassan, I count Bad Empanada, I count all these people amongst that number who they are not on my team. They are not someone that I consider a political ally in any way, shape, or form. It would be better for all of us if they would just go away, right? But what you're doing isn't just joining me in that movement. What you're doing is you're adopting positions and policies that enable the worst excesses of the right. When you have people like Nick Fuentes, when you have people like Matt Walsh, when you have people like Stephen Miller.
I'm so against Fuentes. I'm so against Fuentes.
Yes,
I'm so against it. I've always been, and I still attack him all the time.
Sure, but a lot of your positions are moving in his direction.
No, I disagree strongly. Strongly disagree. It's so different, dude. He's a neo-Nazi. I hate Nazis.
You would have almost the exact same stance on immigration that he does.
No, I don't. Because his whole thing is he doesn't believe any non-white people should live there, and I still think that non-white people can assimilate. I still believe in some level of diversity in the country. The only thing I think is that it just shouldn't be at a rate where white people are made into a minority demographically.
Well,
which I think is a very moderate stance.
I don't think anyone here is rooting for the white people becoming a minority demographic, but I'll tell you what, I'm more concerned about my values.
Unfortunately, a lot of Democrats.
Hold on, just let me finish and I'll let you go. Right? I do not care on a fundamental level whether the people of America's future are white or not. What I do care about, and very deeply, is what principles and values do those future Americans hold. Right? I don't care what they look like. I care what they believe. And that's the difference.
Look, I care mainly about culture and belief. It's not necessarily what people look like that cares to me. I still don't think it would be a good thing to make white people into a demographic minority in America. I don't think mass cultural and demographic change is necessarily a good thing.
Okay. Well, is there any... I think we've kind of circled the drain on
we have gone through...
is there anything you wanted to bring up with Erudite or anything?
I don't know. Look, I will say I have listened to what Erudite said. It has given me cause to reflect. I am thinking about it. I do appreciate the fact that you guys are good faith and you make a lot of good points. And I actually appreciate what Erudite was saying, that she understands my position from a human level. So I respect that. I actually am thankful for this chat because it has actually helped me a bit. But I do think at the end of the day, like, I know you guys are saying like Drew's grifted, he just changes political views, blah, blah, blah. I do think at the end of the day, a big part of it is personnelship.
If it makes you feel better.
Okay.
I'm convinced.
Erudite's weighing in. Official Erudite position, not a grifter.
I think it's like there's a level of like vibes and personal hurt. Because like some of the principles that you had were not as deep as you thought you were, probably because you were somewhat politically naive, which to be fair, lots of people are, and you're 26. Not that I'm not really in ages. 26 doesn't really mean anything to me, but yeah, I don't think you've grifted. I think that like the principles that you previously held probably weren't as deep as you thought that they were. And that's okay, just to be clear. Like that's not...
Look,
there's not a lot of people that actually have deep principles on my side as well, just to be very clear, okay? Most people are just morally lucky. But it just sucks because you have a platform, so that's tough.
Look, I don't think that I've abandoned all my principles because I still support things like universal healthcare. I still support, gay rights and all this stuff. It's just that I don't think that you should have mass level cultural displacement and dislocation. And I think that the left has just gone really wrong when it comes to migration, crime, and unfortunately, increasingly radicalism regarding political violence, like stuff like Charlie Kirk.
That's not the principles that I feel like weren't deep, right? The principles that I think are not deep is what we talked about before, where I said, well, if this principle, like say like anti-political violence or like how we talk about our opposing enemies was deep, you should be as passionate about when the right fails you on that than as the left. But you're not right now. And you said that's kind of true.
Look,
And that's where I'm saying aren't yeah.
If you do go through my history though, I've got so many tweets attacking people like Nick Fuentes. So I am against people like that.
I don't mean Nick Fuentes. I actually
Okay.
agree. You just do attack Nick Fuentes. When I'm saying on the right, I'm saying when we were talking about the political violence and when Matt Walsh was making calls to civil war, you're like, you know what, you're right. Like that is actually really horrifying. And I need to like make sure that I hold these things in scale. That's the thing that I'm talking about. And just to be clear, this isn't like this major moral imputation of being like, your principles aren't that deep. Like I've been in stream for 3 years and there are so many interpersonal values that I thought were like really, really deep that I've had to work on a lot to actually figure out what I care about. So like, this is not like I'm better than you and you're worse. This is like what you're going through is superhuman and normal, and I'm not judging you for it necessarily. I just like hope that at the end of it you come out principled.
It is very difficult, the sense that it is pretty fucking hard, the fact that I had a very public platform, and then it's been hard for me because I was 20 years old when I first got thrust into the public glare, because I was 20 years old and I held one small rally for Hong Kong at my university in Brisbane, Australia, and there were like 300, 400 Chinese nationals who came out and attacked us, and I got beaten up and stuff. And like suddenly I went from being completely anonymous to overnight it was in like the Washington Post and New York Times and all this stuff. So it's hard. I've been trying it's a very difficult thing trying to be 5-6 years of people doing death threats to me and swatting me and all this insane stuff. And there's a massive amount of insane level of hatred that I've had. And having to try and work out my views in light of that at the exact same time, it's difficult. It's a tough thing. Honestly, I think most people would struggle with it. And it's hard because when I was back when this all happened, 2019, 2020, you know, Jack Posobiec, one of the top MAGA guys, he still hates me because back in 2019, 2020, when I was getting expelled from the university. So what happened was I was protesting against the Chinese government. The Chinese government, I got beaten up. The Chinese government put out news articles saying that I should get expelled from the university. The university then tried to do it. And it was in the news, it went in the New York Times and all this stuff. And Jack Posobiec, one of the MAGA guys, he shared my story and he said, Drew's a patriot, let's support him. And I remember I was really left-wing then, and I told him, fuck off, I don't want your support. And he still hates me because of that. And the thing is, I could have been so easily a MAGA grifter in like 2019, 2020. I could have done like the Carl Rittenhouse thing. I could have made a tweet and I could have been like, Trump, please save me. My university's trying to expel me in Australia for China. I could have made a lot of money. And I didn't do that because at the time, I genuinely was a leftist. I genuinely believed that. But like, look, my views have been shifting as a result of major events in my life and major events that I've seen over the past couple of years. And now people are pissed off at me for almost like the opposite reason, because like now they see me shifting in a more conservative direction and they see that they think that I'm now grifting again. It's just like the funny thing is when I told Jack Posobiec to fuck off and I did all that, I remember I lost like thousands and thousands of followers, and all these conservatives who supported me on my China stance were like, Drew, we hate Drew, fuck him. And then now like a lot of leftists are pissed off at me that I've gone the thing is though, I genuinely do like actually just follow what I believe in my heart. And like back then I was genuinely leftist, but now I genuinely don't think I am one anymore. And it's because I have had to reckon myself with all these different events that have happened in my life. October 7 was a massive one. Charlie Kirk was a massive one. Like, you know, these political... Luigi Mangione was a huge one as well. Like, again, I saw all my friends, people I knew in real life, cheering on literally like a cold-blooded execution. So this stuff, it's really difficult. I'm trying to like work out my views as I'm going, and it's difficult when you feel a great sense of betrayal with the people that you believe in are doing all this stuff.
It's hard.
I don't
it's
know.
hard.
I totally agree. I'm just saying, don't let the betrayal of the people who did that cause it to add extra stones to one group's infractions while the stones are not placed on the other side. That's it.
Yeah. Also, we don't. I
enough.
can't speak for Erudite, but I don't want you to be a leftist. I want you to be a liberal. Okay, and I think every liberal
I get you.
needs to oppose
I don't
right? A
care if
lot
you
of what
join my
MAGA
religion.
does.
Just
But
to be
that's
clear.
me.
I
I'm
don't
an
convince people to be
evangelist when it comes to
Christian. I don't want to
liberalism.
convince people to be liberal.
Look,
Don't
I'm
care.
a
I just
liberal
want people to
evangelist.
it.
I want to convert all of you into be liberals with a hard R, okay? So not these weak, pussy-footed liberals, but a hard R liberal, okay? And that's what I want, but that's okay. I want to also say thank you both for coming. I know this is a bit of a bear to schedule, but I think it is time to kind of wrap it up and get some closing
Yeah, no,
thoughts.
I do want to say, listen, I actually do appreciate Erudite and Wick for hosting this, and honestly, actually think it was a really good conversation. And look, it's given me a lot to reflect upon. I am thinking. It's interesting. Erudite does make a lot of good points. It's difficult. I'm in a difficult position because I
Thank you for
genuinely am.
listening.
I am listening. I am listening. I am
I
thinking
know.
about it. And look,
I mean this genuinely. I think it takes a lot for you to come on here and go, yeah, I think early in the conversation you said, yeah, I think that wasn't principled when I didn't come out and engage. Like that takes a lot of epistemic humility. That, just to be clear, I know even most people on my side won't give you any favor for, and that sucks. And I just want to say,
fair
like,
enough.
from
Look,
me to you, genuinely, I really appreciate talking to you. I think you were doing your best to be epistemically humble. I hope I came across as trying to do the same. I really appreciate that you were open to actually talking about it.
no, thank you. Look, it was actually a very good conversation. I actually appreciate it. It's interesting, the psychological stuff that you brought up. It is interesting. It's difficult. It's very difficult. It's tough. It's tough because I don't know. I don't even know necessarily where I fully stand.
Okay.
It's just a difficult.
Well, let's
yeah,
give
no, thank you guys.
let's give some closing statements, and I will get with you once I find out when Loanerbox is available, and give you some options for that. But for now, gang, if you enjoyed this content, if you've liked what you just saw, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm gonna each of these wonderful individuals an outro to tell people where you can find them. Honestly, both of them need no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. We're gonna start with Erudite, and we're going to let Drew have the last word. So, Erudite, closing thoughts, where can people find you? And then we'll give it to Drew.
Not so Erudite, you can find me everywhere. I guess stuff that's upcoming, I'll be at TwitchCon. So if you want to come to TwitchCon and use my promo code to give me a deal on my card, just go to my chat and type ! I think TwitchCon probably, and my link will come up. I'll also be at University of Las Vegas on October 22nd. So if you live in Las Vegas area and you want to come out and say hi, I am the best political creator to take photos with because I know how to take photos and we can do fun poses and gangster signs.
Cool. True.
Guys, thank you. I appreciate the chat, Wick and Erudite. It was actually really good chat. I'm on Twitter at Drew Pavlou. I'm on YouTube at Drew Pavlou, where I've been trying to build up. I've been doing streaming as well, so I streamed this one as well. I am somebody who's very passionate. I'm trying my best to do what I believe to be right. I have broken with the left on some issues. I feel that it's a personal conflict that I've been struggling with. So it's interesting. There's much to think about. But look, I appreciate the conversation. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you for this. I actually really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Anytime you want,
too.
man. And no, it's good to end on it's so rare that my conversations end on a positive note. I'm just very happy. Thanks to both of you. I have links to both their stuff in my YouTube description. What do I got planned coming up? Wednesday, we're going to have a talk about whether or not society coddles men. We're going to have some great guests for that. Okay, so it should be fun. We're going to have Mooncake. We're going to have Ultra. We're going to have Gelatinous Rube and Dat Darn Kitty. So check us out. And with that, I'm going to leave you. I'm not going to end the stream, but I'm going to let these wonderful individuals go. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. What a pleasant convo at the end. What do we think, gang? I know I missed a few super chats. Let me get to them. Okay. Let's see. Where did I miss? $2 from Trib. Erudite and Nick are one of the good ones. Are you talking about Canadians? Look, Canadians. I have way too many of those in my community. Okay, that's all I'm saying. We need to do perhaps a purge. I don't know. They're really weird. Canadian people. Okay, I think it's okay to be a little racist against Canadians. Honestly, no, I'm fucking with y'all. No, it was fun. $2 from Testicle Johnson. Long live the Commonwealth. Okay. Trib1 for $5 says, you don't say you aren't a leftist. You say immigrants are harming the country. There's a difference. It's okay to wake up and realize you're anti-immigrant. Sure. $5 from Old School to say, hey, Wick, just got done streaming Icarus with Cryptic Fox. Check it out if you have time. Is that a game? Icarus, is it fun? Did you enjoy it? I might check it out. $5 from Triple1 to say all that pushback earlier when Erudite brought up the race example, just to say it would be bad if white people got replaced as the majority. Uh-oh. Yeah, I don't like, look. If I had to choose, did he ever tell you if you were American? I think I asked him, but I don't think he said. I hope I got it. If I didn't, I apologize. I think I did, though. Look, they started yapping during my super chats, and I just let them go, because it was a good conversation. If I had to choose whether or not future Americans looked like me, or if they thought like me, I'm gonna choose number 2 every time. Every time. I don't necessarily care if they look like me. I don't think, it just has no value to me. Whether or not they are white guys with beards does not matter on a fundamental level. But it does matter on a fundamental level to me whether or not Americans share the same values I have. Like future Americans share the same values I have. If they think at least somewhat like me. That actually does matter to me. Right? But whether or not they look like me, I don't give a shit. Why would I? I don't know. Right? Like, I don't care. Yeah. And I think that's where Drew gets it wrong. I'm gonna set up a conversation between Drew and Lonerbox on Reform UK. I think that would be interesting. We'll have to find out whether it actually is or not, right? Yeah, that's what I got coming up next week. We'll probably have a call-in show, too. It's going to be a pretty light week because TwitchCon, and a lot of my guests that normally come on my show are going to be at TwitchCon. So, you know, it is what it is. I will see you guys maybe tomorrow, maybe Tuesday. One of those days I'll have a call-in show. And then on Wednesday, we're going to have the debate show. And it'll be fun. It'll be interesting. It'll be cool. And thank you for the donations, and thank you for the likes, thank you for the views. I do appreciate all of that. And even the people who vehemently disagree with me, I do appreciate you too. You're still wrong, but that's okay. It's okay to be wrong, right? Yeah. So, I don't know. Anyone else got anything else? If not, I'll bid thee all adieu. Bon voyage, mon ami.